It was hot, lethally hot. A mundane human wouldn't have lasted in this suffocating heat for long. Even as a master, Sunny was struggling to breathe. His skin was burning, sitting on the sand, hunched. He covered his eyes and looked up at the merciless white sun. The sun was like a small silver coin that hung high in the cloudless azure sky. White sand, azure sky. This was indeed the desert Nephis had once tried to cross. The one that lay east of the forgotten shore, stretching far and wide along the hollow mountains. He couldn't see the dreadful black peaks, though. Either this part of the nightmare desert was much further north than the small fragment Nephis had traversed, or much further east, where the hollow mountains were no more. In either case, Sunny was in big trouble. Nephis had told them that the further one went into the desert. The more dangerous it became. Eventually, she couldn't advance anymore, and chose to take her chances in the mountains instead. Just how deadly was this desert? For Nephis to decide that venturing into a known death zone was a better choice. There was one more thing, too. If it was the same desert, then he had to find shelter before the night came. Failing to do so meant death. Sunny sighed. He was sitting on the white sand, casting 5 stark shadows. A few dozen seconds had already passed since his arrival in this cursed land, and very soon, something was bound to find and attack him. He had to move. But his mind was plagued by too many thoughts. Just a few minutes ago, Sunny had been full of a sense of triumph. He had defeated a saint. He had won. His desperate plan had come so close to fruition. Sunny muttered that it was all useless. With Dire Fang's death, the balance on the battlefield had been bound to shift. Mordred's reflections would have been destroyed. The remaining 2 enemy saints would have been either killed or forced into retreat. Clan Valor would have achieved a sweeping victory. None of its key figures would have perished, and plenty of Awakened would have remained alive to continue defending East Antarctica until the winter solstice. None of that had happened. Of course, everything had ended in ruin. He had lost. Once again, he had been utterly defeated. It was so tiring to always have victory slip through his fingers at the last moment. Sunny was being crushed by the weight of failure. Cursing it all, 2 great clans had clashed with each other. But the only victor was the nightmare spell. These 3 Category 4 gates. It wasn't hard to imagine what was going to happen next in the southern quadrant. Both armies were either already annihilated or would be soon. And more than a few government elites. 2. All the Awaken of Valor and all the Awaken of Song were as good as dead. The only ones who had a chance to survive were the Masters, the Saints, and a handful of people those Saints could drag with them into the Dream Realm. Even then, it wasn't a guarantee that they would have had enough time to escape. And those who would still have to survive the nightmare desert. The siege capitals would be left without the most powerful defenders. And much worse still, there would be swarms of corrupted and great abominations roaming the continent now. Everyone was going to die.
Don't think about it yet.
Sunny gritted his teeth. There was a lot on his mind, but if he continued thinking about it, he would drown in anger and despair. For now, he couldn't allow himself to lose focus. He had to survive first. Sunny was lost in a region of the dream realm that was much more harrowing than the Forgotten Shore, without any way to get back to the waking world. His friends could be lost somewhere between the white dunes, too. He had to find them, if they were still alive, and figure out a way to escape this hell. Well, it wasn't his first time escaping hell, was it? Where there was a will, there was a way. He felt a slight tremor run through the sand beneath him and grimaced, dismissing the situation as a bunch of crap. Escape? How could he escape the nightmare desert? There were 4 ways. The first one was to cross the desert and find a path through the hollow mountains. Needless to say, surviving a journey through 2 entire death zones was highly improbable. The second way was to find one of the saints who had survived the nightmare gates and successfully escaped into the desert. Saints could travel back to the waking world without the help of a gateway, and they could even bring a person or 2 with them. Sunny wasn't sure that he could convince anyone except for Saint Tyrus to save him instead of all others, and there were still Nephis, Cassie, Effie, Kai, and Jet to think about. Any saint that left wouldn't be coming back to this corner of the desert, since that would require returning to the proximity of the gargantuan nightmare gates. So, that way would most likely not work, either. The third way was to become a saint himself. That was, of course, even more suicidal than trying to traverse both the nightmare desert and the hollow mountains. Sunny had barely survived the second nightmare. He had been beheaded, had his heart ripped out of his chest, barely survived thanks to stumbling on Noctis by pure luck, almost lost himself in the endless sea of nightmares, fought against an entire army of awakened, and even faced Mordred at the end. The third nightmare would be much more harrowing, and even if he somehow transcended, there was a high possibility that the sovereigns would make him disappear as a result, which left only the fourth way, the only plausible one. Sunny had to find the Black Skull Citadel and use its gateway to return to the waking world. That, too, was more easily said than done. The nightmare desert, after all, was vast and full of all kinds of horrors. The main problem, though, was that only two people knew the location of the citadel. One of them was Morgan, and the other one was Mordred. So, he had to find one of them first.
Either one will do.
Sunny closed his eyes for a moment and then suddenly jumped back. A split second after he did, the sand under him exploded, and countless hands rose from beneath it, clawing at the air. Sunny noted that it was starting. If this tale pleases you, leave a like on this episode and subscribe so you catch the next one. A tenebrous black steed was flying across the white sands of the nightmare desert, pursued by an unseen horror. Sunny was leaning from the saddle, shielding his eyes against the scorching wind as he brandished the sin of solace. A hand that shot from beneath the ground was cleanly severed and dissolved into a swirl of ash.
Curses, that thing is persistent.
Behind him, a vast swath of the desert was changing. It was almost imperceptible unless one knew what to look for: the minute tremors running through the sand, the slight tilt of the dunes, the subtle shifting of the shadows. Something enormous was moving beneath the sand, following him. He had already used 4 out of his 5 shadows to augment nightmare, leaving only one to strengthen the enchantment of the memory of fire through the underworld armament. That allowed him some measure of relief from the unbearable heat of the desert, at least. But even with the help of the 4 shadows, his mount wasn't fast enough to outrun the creature. Much worse, it wasn't the only abomination in this part of the desert. In fact, Sunny was surrounded by nightmare creatures. There were too many of them to count, all moving in the same direction. They were responding to the call, pulled to the blooming seed of nightmare by its sweet promise. Luckily, most abominations seemed to be in a strange state. It was as though they were hypnotized, forgetting about everything except for the goal of reaching the seed and entering the waking world through it. As long as Sunny didn't get in their way, most paid him no attention. It was deeply disturbing. Really, Sunny had only ever seen nightmare creatures in the throes of murderous frenzy. Having them walk past him with detached indifference was somehow more frightening than facing them in a bloody battle.
Crab.
The desert was wide and flawlessly white, and the towering figures of abominations were moving across it with measured steps, separated from each other by a considerable distance. Their shadows were like long lines of stark blackness. The length of the shadows meant that the sun was already low. The night wasn't far away. Cursing, Sunny guided Nightmare to the left, aiming at the nearest of the walking figures. From the looks of it, it was a corrupted monster. The thing was massive and ghastly, with 4 mighty paws and a tail like that of a scorpion. Its insect-like eyes were staring at something hidden far beyond the horizon. The creature was dangerous, but Sunny was more dangerous. As Nightmare flashed past the monster at stunning speed, the sin of solace swung, cleanly severing the abomination's head. They shot past the beheaded creature and continued forward without ever slowing down. A few moments later, countless hands rose from beneath, rushing away. Sunny turned his head and watched as the hands grabbed the bleeding carcass and pulled it into the sand. Soon, only a few drops of boiling blood remained on the surface. It was as though the massive monster had never existed. The unknown horror stopped following him after that, at least. Its hunger seemingly satiated by the morbid offering.
Damnation.
After a while, he could finally allow himself to slow down, stopping Nightmare at the crest of a tall dune. Sunny breathed heavily, then wrapped 2 more shadows around himself, enhancing the effect of the memory of fire. That way, he was almost comfortable, summoning the endless spring. He drank deeply, allowing the cool water to breathe some life back into his body. Then, he stared at the beautiful glass bottle in his hand. Suddenly, This dormant memory of the fourth tier was the most precious thing in his possession. Who would have thought that it would be so important one day? Water was important, but usually there were many ways to procure it during his wilderness survival courses. Sunny had learned many ways of finding or creating drinkable water in a variety of environments, but none of them would work in this terrible desert. With a sigh, he dismissed the endless spring and looked around. From the height of the dune, Sunny could see far and wide. He could send his shadows to explore, too, if need be. However, that would be risky. He wasn't sure that he was ready to part with even a single shadow in this dangerous and unpredictable land. There was no need to, anyway. There were white dunes around him as far as the eye could see. Countless nightmare creatures could be seen, as well, moving in the same direction. There were also black ruins peppering the desert, half buried in sand. Those ruins didn't really seem like the remains of buildings. Their shape was too strange, and their dimensions were all wrong. The structures, whatever they had once been, all differed in size. A smaller ruin wouldn't be much of a shelter, but some of the larger ones he saw could save him come the night. Of course, there was also the Black Pyramid. Sunny held his breath as he looked at its ominous silhouette. The tomb of Ariel was always in view, far in the distance, however. No matter how long one moved in the direction of the perfectly symmetrical black edifice, it never grew closer, remaining out of touch like a mirage.
So that thing might not even be real.
But Sunny felt that it was. He also knew that there had to be a way to get closer to it. Nephis had never seen the Black Pyramid before, after all, which meant that it could only be seen from certain parts of the desert, which also meant that there had to be a path to it. But Sunny wondered who cared. Sunny certainly didn't. He had no ambitions of conquering the tomb of Ariel, in fact. He wanted to avoid it at all costs. All he wanted to do was find his friends and escape the cursed desert. As soon as possible, grimacing, Sunny chose one of the larger ruins that rose from the sand many kilometers away and sent Nightmare into a gallop. On the way to the ruin, Sunny stumbled on a human. It was the first survivor of the Battle of the Black Skull that he saw in the desert. Sadly, the man was already dead. His body lay on the white sand, staring at the merciless azure sky with glassy eyes. Sunny vaguely recognized him as one of Clan Song's Ascended. They had never spoken to each other before, but he recalled seeing the man during the battle against the Titanic Horde, back in East Antarctica. The Ascended's memory armor had dissipated after its master's death, so the body was only covered by a torn bodysuit. There were several wounds in view, but none of them were serious enough to doom a master. It was unclear what had brought upon the man's death. Maybe there was severe internal damage, or maybe it was simply the heat that had killed him. With a sigh, Sunny jumped off Nightmare, kneeled, and closed the man's eyes. There wasn't much more he could do. So he just remained motionless for a few moments, then climbed back into the saddle and continued on his way. His mood was somber. In the end, the sun had almost disappeared beyond the dunes by the time Sunny reached the large ruin. Scared by the prospect of remaining in the open after dark, he hurriedly dismissed his shadow and climbed over the weathered black stones. He quickly found a narrow fissure in the sand-covered floor and squeezed through it, eventually reaching an underground chamber. Near the end of the narrow crawlway, the stones shifted under his weight, and Sunny fell down in an avalanche of sand. He landed awkwardly and was about to let out a relieved sigh when something cold touched his neck. A steel blade. A hoarse voice resounded from above. "What do we have here?" Sunny carefully put his fingers on the blade of an enchanted glaive and slowly pushed it away from his skin.
Can you not? I really don't want to have my head cut off again.
There was a moment of silence and then a soft gasp.
Sunny.
Looking up, he saw a curious scene. The underground chamber wasn't very large, and there were two beautiful women hiding inside. Both of them were bruised and battered, with grim expressions on their enticing faces. One of them was Jet, and the other one was Seishan. Soul Reaper was closer to the hole he had fallen from, so she had lashed out with her glaive on instinct.
Yeah, it's me. Say, why are you two sitting here in complete darkness?
Jet retracted her weapon, took a step back, and tiredly lowered herself onto the cold stones. A stifled scoff escaped from her lips.
We weren't sure if the light would attract danger.
She remained silent for a moment, and then said she was really glad that he was alive. Sunny sat up, brushed the sand of the Shroud of Dusk, and summoned a luminous memory. The two women grimaced, shielding their eyes from the bright light. Now that he could see colors better, he judged that they were in a worse state than he had initially thought. Jet's armor was torn rather severely, and Seishan's dress was ripped as well. Its wine-colored fabric seemed dirtied by blood. He coughed, trying not to stare, and admitted he felt the same. That sounded too sentimental, so Sunny corrected himself.
I mean, I'm glad to be alive, too. Anyway, the light won't attract the abominations. Most of them are being pulled toward the seeds, and those that are going to rise at night, well, I guess with a Category 4 gates, some of them will leave for the waking world. As well, the rest will be too busy fighting each other. As long as we're out of sight, we should be safe.
He fell silent. Indeed, the true horror of the nightmare desert, the dead soldiers that endlessly continued their ancient battle in the darkness, night after night, as they had for thousands of years, hadn't entered the waking world during the chain of nightmares. That was because most of them were too terrible and powerful to step through Category 3 gates. Now, things would be different. Sunny lingered for a few moments, staring at Jet and Seishan. Both were in sorry states, but at least they were alive. He summoned the endless spring and said,
I've water, by the way.
Their eyes gleamed. Jet was the first one to snatch the bottle, acting with a terrible lack of decorum. Well, thirst would do that to a person. Seishan, who had been a second too late, stared at her coldly. Nevertheless, she patiently waited for her turn while Soul Reaper greedily drank from the endless spring, and she demanded he give it to her. Once Jet was finished, she let out a delighted sigh and passed the bottle to the daughter of Kai Song. The latter, at least, had enough composure to bow slightly and say, "Thank you," before bringing the memory to her parched lips. Sunny watched this scene incredulously.
Two of you trying to kill each other. I swear I saw you fight. How come you're together?
Jet leaned back and smiled.
Yes, we were trying to kill each other. This wench even tried to bite me. It was really gross. But what does it matter now? Here in the desert there are no sides, just us and the nightmare creatures, so there was no reason to fight anymore when we stumbled on each other.
Seishan gave her a long look.
Who are you calling a wench, you corpse?
She grimaced, as if nauseated. Wait, did Seishan try to drink Jet's blood? It must not have tasted too pleasant, judging by that expression. Of all the people on the battlefield, she just had to go and clash with the only person who countered her aspect, compared to her. Even Sunny's luck seemed wonderful. Seishan lingered for a few moments, then returned the endless spring and gave Sunny a long look.
What about you, Sunless? The last I saw of you, Dire Fang was heading to your position. How did you survive?
Sunny received the glass bottle and smiled pleasantly, then corrected that he had actually been the one to kill him. The two of them stared at him with wide eyes.
Right, I received a reward for slaying Dire Fang. I didn't even check.
Seishan opened her mouth to say something, but at that moment, they heard a terrifying sound. It came from above, from the sides, from everywhere. The dead were rising to continue their eternal battle. Soon, a distant cacophony of titanic blows and inhuman roars seeped into the chamber through the hole in its roof, and the stones surrounding them vibrated. Streams of sand flowed through the cracks in the black tiles. No one was in the mood to talk after that. They just sat in silence, tense, and waited. Time passed, then a different sound reached their ears. Someone, or something, was crawling through the narrow fissure, descending into the underground chamber. Instantly, all three of them, Sunny, Jet, and Seishan, were on guard. Jet readied her glaive while Sunny gripped the hilt of the Sin of Solace tighter. Seishan, meanwhile, lowered her hand slightly, as if preparing to defend herself with bare fists. The cursed sword whispered into Sunny's ear, "Use them as a shield, take a step back, and let whatever comes feast on their flesh first." Sunny struggled to ignore it. Before, he hadn't dared to send his shadows outside to keep an eye on the desert. With how dreadful the creatures populating it at night were, many of them were bound to possess means of destroying intangible things. Sunny didn't want to risk one of his shadows being obliterated. But now, he regretted that decision as his expression hardened. Streams of sand fell from above, and then, someone jumped softly on the stone plates of the chamber's floor. Sunny felt immense relief. It was a human. Jet remained on guard, but Seishan seemed to relax. She straightened slightly and let out a soft sigh, her exquisitely beautiful face illuminated by a pale smile.
Ascended Su, you've survived as well.
They were safe. The newcomer wasn't a terrifying nightmare creature. It was a survivor like the three of them, one of the masters of clan song. The man groaned slightly, then shielded his eyes from the bright light of the luminous memory. His hand trembled slightly. Lady Song. Looking at him, Sunny suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. A sense of fear like he had never experienced before wrapped its fingers around his heart. He almost staggered back but forced himself to remain in place. Wearing the same expression as before, Sunny stared at the newcomer. The man was tall and muscular. His black hair was cut short, revealing a strong, handsome face. His eyes were like two pools of darkness, and there was a strained smile on his cracked lips. And he asked what the hell was happening. Ascended Su wielded no weapons and wore no armor. He was dressed in a dark red bodysuit, which was torn, revealing ugly lacerations and bruises covering his body. It was, without a doubt, the dead man whose eyes Sunny had closed just a few hours ago. Sunny shivered, and even the blurry figure of the Sin of Solace who stood beside him suddenly seemed wary.
Master Su, thank the gods, have you seen any of my sisters?
The man looked around, then said hoarsely, "No, my lady, I haven't seen anyone, only you." Is it some kind of regenerative aspect? No, wait, is it that bastard Mordred? Sunny stared at the newcomer, studying his every move. Then he shifted his perception and looked within the newcomer. The blade of the Sin of Solace trembled slightly. Within the body of Master Su, where a radiant soul core should have been, instead, there was nothing but vile, impenetrable darkness. A darkness so vast and deep that Sunny couldn't even conceive its magnitude. Jet wasn't in a hurry to lower her glaive. Looking at the creature, she frowned slightly and asked,
How did you survive being outside during the night?
The creature wearing the corpse of Ascended Su looked at her and shivered. "Barely, my lady, just barely." Then the creature smiled and asked if there were more people nearby. The question was directed at Jet, so Sunny could remain silent. He shifted slightly, considering their options. It's a nightmare creature that can control a corpse and speak the human language flawlessly. It even knew Seishan's name. It can even perfectly imitate human behavior. If not for Weaver's lineage, I wouldn't have known at all. It's unlike anything I've seen or heard about before. And the creature was strong enough to walk the nightmare desert at night. The three of them were trapped in a small underground chamber with a creature like that. Sunny felt terror. He activated the Blessing of Dusk and sent Jet a mental message, trying to sound calm. "That thing isn't human." Jet sighed, then shook her head.
There might be, but we haven't met anyone else. The four of us will have to stick together.
At the same time, she answered Sunny, "I know its soul is much more vast than a master's soul should be, or a saint's soul, even. It's harrowing." Then, Sunny sent a message to Seishan. "That's not Ascended Su. Think of an answer, and I will hear it." The beautiful woman didn't show any sign of surprise as her answer resounded in his mind. "What are you talking about? I know this man. He and I grew up together. Wait, did the son of Anvil take his body?" "Gods, I never thought I would say something like that, but I wish it really was Mordred." Sunny summoned the runes, seeking the prize he had received for slaying Dire Fang. No, something else took his body, his dead body, something old, vast, and powerful. I saw the corpse on the way to the ruin. The creature, meanwhile, seemed a little disappointed. Its smile grew bleak. "Of course, we will stick together and search for more people, once the morning comes. Yes." Sunny stared at a particular string of runes, and then offered the endless spring to the corpse of Ascended Su. Forcing out a smile, he said,
That sounds like a plan. Here, some water. You must be dying of thirst.
The creature accepted the glass bottle with an awkward nod. Yes, I am thirsty." Sunny smiled as he watched it bring the bottle to the corpse's lips. Then, without changing expression, he silently thrust the Sin of Solace into the creature's chest. At the same time, a blade made of darkness appeared from behind, piercing the dead man's back. Saint escaped from the shadows, her eyes burning with crimson flames. A whirlwind of white sparks rose around Sunny, almost filling the entire chamber. Jet and Seishan were already moving. 2. The creature looked at the endless spring, which was disappearing from the corpse's hand, and titled its head a little, "Yes, I am thirsty." Its smile widened into a grin, and Ascended Sue's face was distorted by that grin, turning into a wicked parody of what a human face was supposed to look like. The corpse's hands shot up with impossible speed, grabbing the blades of Sunny's and Saint's swords. The pristine white jade of the Sin of Solace seemed to warp under immense pressure. Sunny suddenly felt cold, realizing the situation wasn't good. The Sin of Solace was a transcendent memory, and one that had an enchantment enhancing the material of the blade at that, and yet, as soon as the creature grabbed the white jade, Sunny felt that it was moments away from breaking. He had been planning to deliver the follow-up strike while augmenting the cursed sword with all 5 of his shadows, but it felt like if he did, there would be no sword for him to augment. Cursing, Sunny hurriedly dismissed the jade blade and staggered back. At the same time, Master Su moved, and Saint was suddenly flying back. She hit the wall of the chamber with a deafening boom, shattering the black stones and creating a deep crater. White sand flowed from the cracks, falling on her broken armor. A split second later, Jet brought her glaive down on the harrowing creature. Its ghostly blade passed through the abomination's dead flesh unimpeded, cutting straight into its soul. Then, a net of black cracks spread through the enchanted steel, and it exploded into countless fragments. Startled, Soul Reaper lost her balance. Seishan's delicate hands were like demonic claws, easily slicing through the creature's neck. But the creature was still smiling. The wound on its chest that the Sin of Solace had left behind had already closed. The deep cut delivered by Saint's sword was gone, too, as Sunny, Jet, and Seishan watched in horror. The mangled neck of Master Su rippled and healed, with not a speck left on his skin.
What?
At the same time, she sent Sunny a tense mental message. What do we do? He was the one who had informed her about the nature of the newcomer, so Seishan must have hoped that Sunny knew something about how to deal with the creature. However, he didn't. He only knew that fighting it was suicidal. Sunny didn't hesitate at all, dismissing Saint. He dashed back and shouted for them to run. In the next moment, the whirlwind of sparks filling the chamber finally coalesced into a lumbering, monstrous figure. A bestial hand exploded forward, swatting Master Su aside and slamming him against the wall. No matter how strong the creature was, its mass remained the same as that of the possessed corpse. So, even if its power was great and terrible, it wasn't impossible to overcome, at least for a few moments. And that was exactly what the echo of Saint Dire Fang Sunny had summoned was supposed to buy them. The body of the towering beast occupied almost half of the underground chamber, scraping the ceiling with its head. One arm was extended forward, pushing the abomination into the cracked stones, while the other was already flying to deliver a devastating strike. Sunny doubted that the echo would be able to accomplish much, though, what the hell? I actually managed to receive the echo of a mighty saint. A saint, damn it. But it's barely enough to slow the enemy down for a moment. The nightmare desert was veiled in darkness, and darkness meant death. However, being trapped in the small underground chamber with the harrowing creature also meant death. They could either remain and try to fight, or escape and try to survive the ancient battlefield. Both choices were equally fatal, but at least the latter would kill them a few seconds, or maybe even minutes. Later, Jet was the first one to jump up, grab the edges of the narrow fissure, and climb into the narrow crawlway. Her figure disappeared from sight, and Seishan instantly followed, urged on by Sunny to hurry without wasting any time. Sunny stepped through the shadows and appeared above ground, just in time to grab Jet's hand and help her climb out of the fissure. The roar of the eternal battle, which had been muted by the breadth of stone, assaulted them like a storm. Looking out of the ruin, Sunny paled under the ghostly starlight. Legions of the ancient dead were fighting each other. There was no skin or flesh left on their perfectly black bones. Some of the dead resembled humans, some were like giants, and some were too monstrous and alien to describe with words. However, all of them were terrifyingly powerful. It was strange to see that the world hadn't been destroyed by the dreadful fury of their battle. How was a fragile human supposed to survive that cataclysmic clash?
We are supposed to go through that.
Seishan had just climbed out of the fissure and stopped, staring at the scene of the harrowing battle. Her silken gray skin suddenly seemed darker. Jet looked at the desert beyond the ruin, then at the hole they had just climbed out of. Just at that moment, the whole structure shuddered, as if something was pushing against the black stones from below, and a second later, the spell whispered into Sunny's ears, "Your echo has been destroyed." He staggered and gritted his teeth.
Just like that.
Sunny knew that the echo of Dire Fang wouldn't be able to defeat the harrowing creature, but still, he hadn't expected it to be destroyed in mere seconds. He had just gotten that echo, and now it was gone. Just what kind of horror was wearing the body of Master Su? No matter what it was, the three of them weren't capable of fighting it, even if Dire Fang himself had been here, or all the other saints of the great clans. Sunny wasn't sure that the abomination could have been stopped. Summoning Nightmare, he shouted to Jet and Seishan to get on. Soul Reaper stared at him for a split second.
But I still don't know how to ride a horse.
Figure it out if you want to live.
A moment later, both Jet and Seishan climbed onto Nightmare. The black steed instantly rushed away from the narrow fissure in the stone floor. Sunny was just a step or two ahead, turning into a swift shadow. Together, the four of them flew out of the ruin and plunged into the dreadful havoc of the eternal battle. Nightmare flew through the battlefield where the servants of dead deities fought against each other, unable to resolve their ancient grudge even after thousands of years had passed. All around the galloping steed, giants made of black bones clashed with murderous fury, each strike of a rusted blade, each blow of a vicious claw. Each snap of crushing jaws produced powerful shockwaves that stirred the white sand and made it seem as if the world was on the verge of collapsing. Angry sparks flew into the air, and a cacophonous clangor filled the dark sky.
Crazy, this is crazy.
Sunny was in the form of a shadow, gliding across the sand in front of Nightmare. He was serving as a guide, and the black stallion followed, carrying Jet and Seishan. Sunny's mind was in overdrive, absorbing every minute detail of what was happening around them. He had to find a way to avoid the ancient wraiths and slip between them, somehow, while not being destroyed by their destructive wrath. It wasn't easy. No, it was almost impossible. His only saving grace was that the dead didn't seem to pay them any attention. Still, just the aftershocks of their dreadful attacks were enough to obliterate a puny ascended like Sunny. As they moved away from the ruin, Sunny saw and cursed damnation, a black skeleton easily parting the night sky with its obsidian sword. The abominable bone behemoth that had been attacking the dead swordsman shuddered and collapsed, making the whole desert shake. Its mountain-like skeleton, almost a kilometer long, was cleanly cut in half along the spine, a phalanx of ancient warriors marching forward to meet the charge of monstrous skeletal cavalry. The moment the two tides of black bones met, millions of stars were suddenly extinguished in the sky, two giants colliding above the dunes. One wielded a sword, while the other had iron shackles fastened around its wrists and ankles. The heavy chains rang as a gargantuan shackled hand shot forward, grabbing the colossal sword and flinging it away, right in the direction of Sunny, who spat a curse. The giant sword fell down just a few meters ahead of Sunny. However, it didn't hit the sand. Instead, the ancient weapon plunged into the shadows, disappearing into their bottomless embrace. The steel blade flashed past his intangible form like a wall of steel, barely missing Sunny himself. No one really knew what the Nightmare Desert had been before, but it was known that one of the last, or at least one of the fiercest, battles in the war between the demons and the gods had taken place here, and Sunny remarked that they wouldn't survive here for long. Maybe the desert had already existed back then, or maybe this land had been turned into a desert by the battle. No one knew why the fallen soldiers rose from the dead every night to continue the ferocious clash. Either, why did they continue to fight? What power had been unleashed here? Who was the architect of this nightmare? All Sunny knew was that this was no place for the living. It was barely a place suited for the dead. Even the weakest of the black skeletons were equal to powerful corrupted creatures. The strongest, he didn't even want to know, from what Nephis had said. The true horror was hidden in the heart of the desert, where the champions of the two armies had fought and died. Sunny struggled to imagine what could be more horrific than the catastrophic clash happening around them. But he understood very well that they weren't going to survive in the open. They were like ants here. No one had stepped on them yet, but with how intense and harrowing the fighting between the dead was, it was only a matter of time, minutes, or maybe even seconds, before someone or something erased them from existence. Just an echo of a distant strike was enough to annihilate them. He had been planning to reach some other ruin. The location of the nearest structures was burned into his memory, but once they entered the battlefield, Sunny realized that it was of no use. The white dunes had shifted, and he had no marks to orient himself in the desert. From the moment the three of them escaped the ruin, they were utterly lost. The ground shook and split as a skeleton in rusted armor slammed its war hammer into the shield of a six-armed demon, and Nightmare almost stumbled, bearing its fangs. The black steed soared into a high jump, landed on the spine of a lumbering monster, galloped across it and landed on the other side. Faster than wind, Jet and Seishan held on for dear life. Sunny was thrown out of the shadows and rolled on the sand, then jumped to the side, barely avoiding a titanic foot that descended from somewhere above like a black cliff. The shockwave of its landing sent him stumbling back, and he tasted blood, dazed. He dove back into the shadows and flew toward Nightmare.
We need to hide, we need to hide.
Suddenly, Sunny saw a flash of light somewhere far away. He couldn't really perceive colors while in the form of a shadow, but from the purity of the light, he knew that it had to be white, some distance away, obscured by countless fighting skeletons. A white halo was rising above the desert.
Oh, there.
Without spending too much time doubting himself, Sunny pivoted and flew toward the distant light. Nightmare followed, foam falling from his mouth. All around them, the armies of the dead continued to annihilate each other, their battle slowly turning into a frenzied, apocalyptic scene of the end of the world. Sunny knew that he was going to die. He was supposed to be dead already. Even, the power of the clashing creatures was too great for mere mortals to survive. And yet, it seemed that luck was on his side today. Somehow, they were continuing to cling to their lives. Eventually, they reached the source of the white light, hidden behind rolling white dunes. A stone edifice protruded from the sand. It was surrounded by a ring of white flame, and, strangely enough, none of the black skeletons dared to cross it. Sunny didn't risk plunging into the fire either. Instead, he stepped through the shadows and appeared within the ring of flames. Nightmare simply jumped over them, landing nearby. The ruin was in front of them, seemingly empty. There was no movement inside. Feeling his heart start to beat faster, Sunny glanced at the white flame and then at the broken black stones. His breath grew heavy as he whispered Neph's name. The harrowing battle was still raging all around them, and Sunny struggled to suppress the feeling of primordial terror that threatened to overwhelm his reason. Thinking back to their mad dash across the dark battlefield, he felt his hands tremble. How the hell did they survive? He winced and pushed the fear to the side. There was no time to be afraid. Glancing at Jet and Seishan, Sunny nodded silently and took a step toward the ruin. No matter what awaited them inside, they couldn't remain in the open. The ancient structure was in a sorry state. It had withstood thousands of years of heat and wind, but was nearly destroyed by whatever it was that had transpired here minutes ago. The spherical dome was ruptured, and stone shards lay on the white sand, some covered in dancing flames. It was as though a powerful explosion had wrecked it from within, spreading fire and debris all around. A few chunks of broken stone were large and heavy enough to crush an armored vehicle. Sunny extended his shadow sense as far as he could, but the black walls of the ruined structure were somehow blocking it. Followed by Jet and Seishan, he carefully approached the hole in the dome's wrecked wall, lingered for a moment, and jumped inside. The first thing that met them was the stench of burned flesh. The ruin was much smaller than the one they had sheltered in before, and from the looks of it, there was no path to the underground portion of the structure. There was only this one spherical chamber, with its floor partially buried under the sand. A blackened corpse lay in the middle of the round hall. It seemed human, but it was impossible to tell who that human had been. The corpse was burned too badly, and all its features were destroyed by the flame. There was someone else in the chamber, too. Sunny cursed and dashed forward, appearing near the motionless figure a split second later. Nephis was laying on the black stones, her armor almost destroyed. With her eyes closed, wisps of white fire were escaping from the terrible wounds covering her body, and in the bleak light, her face looked pale and vulnerable.
No.
A moment later, a relieved sigh escaped from his lips. She was alive, just unconscious. The wounds were already healing, too. Just in these few short seconds, their edges had already grown closer. Jet and Seishan slowly approached. Soul Reaper kneeled, studying the charred corpse. After a while, Sunny forced himself to turn away from Neph and asked who it was and if he could tell. Jet hesitated, then shook her head.
No, the body is too damaged. However, it gives me the creeps.
The three of them remained silent for a few moments, wondering what had happened here. Had Nephis fought with another survivor? Or had there been another creature like Ascended Sue? Both possibilities were a little unnerving. Eventually, Sunny shook his head.
It doesn't matter, we need to destroy this corpse. Otherwise, there's a chance that it'll rise and start talking to us again.
There were no objections. After disposing of the corpse, the three of them gathered around the unconscious Nephis and sat in tense silence, waiting for dawn with terror gripping their hearts. In the morning, the sounds of the battle grew quiet. Sunny, who hadn't closed his eyes or allowed himself to relax for a single moment, sent one of his shadows to take a look outside. He was utterly exhausted. Usually, an Ascended could go a long time without needing to rest, and Sunny had the benefit of wearing the Shroud of Dusk as well, but in the past 24 hours, he had participated in a viciously intense battle, fought a saint, traversed countless kilometers of the Nightmare Desert, and even survived the ruinous clash of the dead armies, not to mention facing the harrowing creature that wore the corpse of Master Su. Sunny was tired. Outside, the desert was tranquil and pristine. The white dunes stretched as far as the eye could see, and there was no sign of the terrible forces that had fought across this hellish place just hours before. The sand had swallowed everything. It had been terribly cold in the desert during the night, but now that the sun had appeared above the horizon, the unbearable heat was coming back. He let out a hoarse sigh. The skeletal warriors were gone, but what about Master Su? Had the creature followed them into the battlefield and got destroyed, or had it waited inside the ruin patiently, waiting for the sun to rise? Sunny noted that they were gone. Was it coming for them now? Sunny didn't know. Jet and Seishan were sitting back to back. While he was a couple steps away, Neph's head rested on his knees, summoning the endless spring. Sunny brought the beautiful glass bottle to her lips and poured out a little bit of water as it flowed into her mouth. Nephi stirred a little and then coughed. Her eyes opened, and she stared at him from below, slightly confused. A slight smile appeared on Sunny's face as he told her she was awake and to take it slow. Nephis flinched, then sat up and grabbed the endless spring. She drank from it greedily, and then looked at Sunny. White sparks danced in her eyes, as if agitated.
How are you here?
He shrugged.
I told you that I would see you on the other side.
Sunny lingered for a few moments and scoffed.
Don't look at me like that, to be honest. We saw the light of your flames from afar and rushed here, hoping to find shelter. If not for that, we'd be dead for sure.
Nephis glanced at Jet and Seishan. A small frown appeared on her face. Then, she suddenly shuddered and turned around, staring at the spot where the charred corpse had been before. Seishan finally spoke.
We got rid of it. We have encountered a creature that can possess corpses, so keeping a dead body with us didn't seem safe.
Nephis shivered.
Yes, I've encountered such a creature too.
Sunny remained silent for a while, wondering how was it that she had managed to kill the damn thing. Did it have something to do with her ascended ability, longing, or the nature of her aspect in general? The dead of the Nightmare Desert seemed unwilling to approach the white flames. More importantly, was there more than one creature like the one they had fought? Or was it a creature capable of inhabiting multiple vessels at the same time? His expression was grim.
Do you know what that thing was?
Nephis hesitated for a few moments, then nodded.
I am not sure, but I think I do.
She grimaced, looked at her ruined armor, and raised one trembling hand.
There were 3 nightmare gates, but only 2 gate guardians entered the waking world. The third, I think that it stayed behind in the dream realm.
Nephis grew quiet for a bit, and then added that the creature had come to hunt them. There wasn't much time to talk. If the guardian of a Category 4 gate was really on their trail, then they needed to run, even if Nephis was wrong. The creature they had met was immeasurably strong, considering its power and frightening level of intelligence. It had to be a great devil, at least. It was much more likely to be a tyrant, or something even more terrifying. Sunny had killed a great devil once, but that wasn't a real kill. The spawn of the vile thieving bird had been unborn, and weakened by thousands of years of neglect in the branches of the soul-devouring tree. More than that, Sunny had only survived that encounter because of his unique soul composition. Only after meeting an actual great nightmare creature did he realize how harrowing these beings truly were. The thing pretending to be Ascended Sue wasn't even the real body of the abomination. Most likely, it was simply one of its manifestations. But it had already been strong enough to shrug off all their attacks, severely wound Saint, and destroy a transcendent echo in mere seconds. As for whether it was the gate guardian, logically speaking, that was impossible. Nightmare creatures were compelled by the seeds, unable to refuse their call. All they could do was be drawn by it and invade the waking world. However, Sunny had already seen that the great abominations weren't as beholden to the rule of the spell as the lesser creatures. One of them had actually used its power to forcefully widen the nightmare gate. If one of the gate guardians was capable of that, who was to say that a different one couldn't stay back to slaughter those humans who would flee to the dream realm? Mere minutes after Nephis regained consciousness, the 4 of them abandoned the ruined stone dome and ventured into the desert, urged on by Sunny to hurry. As the 4 exhausted masters fled across the desert, they learned about what had happened to Neph. She had left the waking world soon after Sunny, and was drawn into the nightmare desert like the rest of them. Nephis fought against several nightmare creatures and eventually found another human, one of the Valor Ascended. Together, they sought and found a shelter to survive the approaching night. There was something strange about that Ascended, though. When she offered to heal his wounds, the man refused. His excuse was that she should save her essence for when they find more people. But Nephis felt that he wanted to avoid touching her flames, which put her on guard. It was only after the dead rose from the sand that the Ascended attacked her.
The strangest thing was that I don't think he wanted to kill me.
Sunny, Jet, and Seishan looked at her with confusion, and Nephis frowned.
It was more like he wanted to spread into me.
Her mouth twitched in revulsion.
But nothing happened as a result. The creature seemed surprised, and that gave me a chance to unleash all my flames. I guess desperation fueled them with enough strength to burn it. Then, I woke up with the 3 of you around me.
Sunny was suffering from the terrible heat, but at the same time, he felt cold. Humans didn't know much about the corruption. They just attributed the vile nature of the nightmare creatures to the spell, but really, the corruption had existed long before Weaver created the spell, and Sunny wondered if it had been trying to corrupt Neph. In fact, the ancient people hadn't used the term nightmare creatures. Instead, they had simply called those creatures consumed by the vile darkness, the corrupted. Gods and demons had fought against the unknown in ancient times, and then, awakened fought against the corrupted during the Age of Heroes. Creatures weren't the only ones who could be corrupted. Either humans could succumb to the corruption. As well, there was something that troubled Sunny much more, though, and he admitted that the situation was troubling. Both Master Sue and the Ascended that had attacked Nephis were strangely insistent on one thing: finding more humans. So, could it be that the 4 of them hadn't really escaped the pursuit of the creature? Could it be that it was letting them live in hopes that they would lead it to more survivors? Suddenly, Sunny felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked around, taking in the immaculately white landscape of the desert, almost expecting to see a dark figure to be following them from afar. But, of course, if the corpse of Master Sue was indeed following them, it wouldn't allow itself to be seen. Sunny did see something else, though. There, in the vast azure sky, why was there a black dot there? He stopped and looked up, gesturing for the others to prepare. there were still abominations traversing the desert on their way to the nightmare seeds, even if there were fewer of them than there had been yesterday. Some of them were of the winged variety, too. However, those creatures flew straight toward the seeds, not paying attention to anything else. The black dot, however, was moving in the wrong direction. It was barreling straight at them. Sunny, Nephis, Jet, and Seishan raised their weapons, ready to face the worst. Less than a minute later, the dark figure fell from the sky and landed just a few meters away from them, raising a cloud of sand into the air. Ivory armor, auburn hair, an infuriatingly handsome face, and magnetic green eyes that were shining with relief and concern. Sunny blinked a couple of times and whispered Kai's name. His friend let out a long sigh and wiped the sweat off his brow. Then, he smiled brightly, making Nephis, Seishan, and even Jet blush a little.
Thank the gods, I've found you.
Kai looked a bit tired and dehydrated, but other than that, he seemed fine. His transcendent armor had originated from a fire-breathing dragon. After all, out of all them, he was probably capable of dealing with the lethal heat of the nightmare desert best. Looking at his friend, Sunny felt profound relief. He knew, of course, that the government force had been caught between the three gates as well. They hadn't participated in the battle, and were protected by a saint. So, their chances of escaping into the dream realm unscathed had been high. However, knowing and seeing were two different things. Now that Sunny saw Kai, a huge burden had been lifted from his heart. It was a bit bizarre, of course, to be happy about a friend becoming trapped in a death zone with very little hope of ever returning to the waking world. But considering the situation, one had to count their blessings. Sunny exhaled slowly.
Kai, you really know how to make an entrance, don't you? Where's Effie?
The archer smiled.
She's fine. We are with a sizable group of survivors. Many people have entered the desert near each other and naturally bonded together. My farsight and flight abilities make me the best person to search for survivors, so I've been scouring the desert. It's really fortunate that I stumbled on you first thing in the morning. Nephis, Seishan, Colonel Jet, it's good to see you all safe and sound.
Kai's ability to see things from a ridiculous distance, and even peer straight through solid matter, made him uniquely suited for search and rescue missions. Not to mention that he could traverse great distances swiftly with his extremely fast flight ability, and Sunny remarked that it made sense. Still, the archer must have fought more than one flying abomination and risked his life on several occasions to make sure that as many humans as possible survived. How very Kai of him. Neph and Jet greeted the handsome young man warmly. Even Seishan, who was usually reserved, spared him a small smile. It was strange for Sunny to see someone interact with representatives of clan valor, clan song, and the government without making any distinction. But then again, Kai had no part in the conflict between the great clans. More than that, even though Sunny kept forgetting it. The archer was the only member of Neph's cohort who had spent a considerable amount of time living in the bright castle under Gunlog's rule. While it was doubtful that Kai and Seishan had interacted a lot, their stations were too different. It was certain that they knew each other much better than the rest of them knew the daughter of Kai Song. Kai was also close to several of her handmaidens, so it wasn't unusual to see her treat him with friendliness. At that moment, Seishan asked,
The group of survivors, are there saints among you?
Although she tried to keep her voice emotionless, it was obvious that she wanted to know the fate of her sisters. Kai's expression turned a little bleak. He shook his head.
Saint Kor was with us. He's the reason the group exists. Without him, most of us would have perished in the sands. He was also the one who found a reliable shelter for us to survive the nights. However, after ensuring our basic safety, he took as many ascended as he could and left for the waking world. East Antarctica must be in the throes of a terrible crisis, and his presence there's paramount. We all understood.
Kai sighed.
Other than that, we haven't seen another saint. Sir Maddock and Dire Fang perished on the battlefield. As for the other four, they have to be somewhere near, unless they too chose to return.
Seishan's beautiful eyes lost some of their glimmer. She nodded silently and grew quiet. Jet, meanwhile, looked away and grimaced.
That's the old man for you. He always has his priorities straight.
It was hard to tell whether Wake of Ruin's ruthlessly logical decision to abandon the survivors and return to where he could save the most lives gladdened or disappointed her. The two shared a close relationship, so it wasn't impossible to imagine that Soul Reaper had hoped to receive Saint Kor's help, or at least consideration. Then again, Jet wasn't a person who relied on others to solve her problems. Perhaps she was simply happy to know that wake of ruin survived. Sunny had more pressing questions to ask, though Kai frowned in confusion as Sunny asked if he had encountered the creature.
The creature. We have encountered many creatures. Which one are you talking about?
Sunny and Nephis exchanged a glance.
There's a great abomination hunting the survivors in the desert. It can possess dead bodies, and it's also smart enough to perfectly imitate human behavior. We barely survived encountering it.
Kai paled a little.
Gods, in that case, I've to inform the others as soon as possible. Sadly, I haven't only found survivors. I've found a few bodies as well, some of them not too far from our camp, luckily. None of them seem to be moving. We haven't faced that horror yet.
He frowned, then raised an eyebrow.
What? Why are you looking at me like that, Sunny?
Sunny lingered for a few long moments and let out a heavy sigh.
You might not have faced it yet, true.
Nephis added evenly.
Or you might have faced it already. You just didn't know what you were facing.
Kai's expression grew ugly. Sunny looked at the boundless expanse of pristine white dunes.
It's really hard to tell that thing apart from real humans, so how many survivors are in your group? How many of them had been with you from the very start, and how many joined recently?
Feeling a cold shiver run down his spine, he hesitated for a few moments, and then asked,
How many people did Wake of Ruin take with him back to the waking world?
Move, monster. An ascendant of Clan Valor had fear in his eyes as he pushed Mordred in the back with the butt of his spear. Mordred had already been walking as fast as he could, so the forceful push made him stumble and fall. The blistering white sand burned his mangled face, he sighed, then struggled to stand up. One of his eyes was gone, and he had only one hand left. His reflections had all been destroyed. His body was in a sorry state. Even though Mordred had managed to escape the rampage of the great being, his luck in the Nightmare Desert was awful. Soon after entering it, he stumbled on the pursuing Gate Guardian, and after barely surviving that unfortunate encounter, a band of surviving masters of Clan Valor ambushed and overpowered him. He had failed to finish off his sister, too, which Mordred called a pity. Now, his arms were bound behind his back with enchanted shackles. Even if he wanted to abandon his original body, he was temporarily trapped within it. The heavy chains were probably not the tool Morgan had planned to imprison him with, but they too were forged by his father. Getting out of the shackles was going to be troublesome. If anything, though, having only one hand left could help with that. Stand up. Mordred sighed in exasperation.
I am trying, really now. Is this how you treat a Prince of Valor?
Instead of the answer, the master angrily hit him in the ribs. Mordred plopped back into the scorching sand. Another voice resounded from somewhere above. Stop it, you're only slowing us down. The Skinwalker has to be drawing close. If we want to survive, we need to reach the Citadel as soon as possible. Indeed, that was the only reason that the stragglers of Clan Valor had kept him alive. They wanted Mordred to show them the way to the Black Skull Citadel. The Nightmare Desert was vast, but with the Echo Mounts, the band of survivors had been able to traverse a great deal of distance in the past day. Their luck was also not too bad. The area where the call had pulled them wasn't that far from the Citadel. With Mordred's help, they managed to make it most of the way there. The last stretch, however, had to be traversed on foot. Someone pulled him to his feet. The woman was trying to appear calm, but he could feel her fear. The Ascended had encountered the Skinwalker, too. In fact, the ones with him now were simply those who had survived the encounter. They knew that death, or something much worse, was relentlessly pursuing them. Lead the way, your life depends on reaching the Black Skull, too. Where is it? Mordred lingered for a moment, then smiled. He walked forward, navigating between white dunes and ancient ruins, telling them not to worry as they were already close, after several hours of suffocating heat. They finally saw the giant Black Skull appear in the distance. The masters froze for a moment, excitement burning in their eyes. Mordred, however, silently took a step back. He shook his head. These people asked him where the Citadel was, and he led them here. However, they should have asked another question as well. The question was really simple. What had he done with the corpses of the awakened inside the Black Skull Citadel? The answer was that he had done nothing. Nevertheless, human figures suddenly started emerging from inside the giant black skull. 1, 2, 3, a dozen, 2 dozens, 3. Knight Shtad's headless corpse was also there, walking at the front. The survivors wanted to escape the Skinwalker, but they had actually been marching toward their deaths all along. Turning around, Mordred allowed his body to fall and roll down the slope of a tall white dune, knowing it was time to run. In the end, Kai stayed with Sunny and the others. Together, they made their way through the desert, heading for the spot where he had left the other survivors. The path wasn't easy. There were too many powerful nightmare creatures around, and even though most of them were mesmerized by the call of the seeds, some weren't, or at least not completely. Luckily, none of the abominations they had to fight were of the great rank. Each of the 5 masters was immensely powerful, too. Still, it was a rough journey. All of them were utterly exhausted, suffering from the inhuman conditions of the White Desert, and under terrible mental strain because of the harrowing feeling of being pursued. Nobody knew whether the corpse of Master Su was on their trail or not, but just the possibility of meeting the creature again was enough to fill them with a suffocating sense of dread. The abominations they fought were all powerful and dreadful. 2 out of the 5 of them. Nephis seemed to be affected the least, however. She was struggling with her own burden, looking at the flawlessly white expanse of white dunes. She shook her head and sighed quietly.
I never thought I would return here one day, or at least so soon.
For them, this land was called the Nightmare Desert simply because it was the source of the chain of nightmares. But for Nephis, for her, it was the source of her personal nightmares. She had never spoken about her time here in detail, but Sunny knew that it must have been a gruesome experience. Gruesome enough that the proud and strong Changing Star had agreed to receive psychological counseling. Even this desert, and whatever she had experienced in the second nightmare, weren't things one could easily forget.
I can imagine. No, actually, I don't think I can.
Sunny had only spent a day in the Nightmare Desert, and that was as a master in the company of other people. Yet the sight of endless white dunes was already making him feel a hint of despair. What would it have been like to get lost in this cursed land alone, as a powerless sleeper?
We're getting close.
Kai's voice distracted him from the heavy thoughts. In front of them, the sand receded a little, and 5 strangely shaped metal towers could be seen protruding from it, arranged in a semicircle. The sunlight was reflecting on the polished metal, making it even more blinding. Each tower had a different height, with the shortest of them being at least several dozen meters tall. Sunny stared at them for a few moments before realizing what the towers were. They were the tips of 5 fingers belonging to a colossal steel gauntlet. The gauntlet itself was buried under sand. He didn't know what creature could have worn the gauntlet, and where the rest of it was, and right now, Sunny didn't care. All he cared about was that the towers were hollow, and there was shade inside, and Sunny noted that there were also people inside. Sunny's expression turned grim as he followed Kai toward the temporary camp of the survivors.
It'll be good if there are only people.
There were lookouts hiding in the shadows of the 5 towers, of course. Sunny had no trouble noticing them. All of them were masters, and in a very rough shape. Just like Sunny, they had gone from participating in a bloody battle to entering the Nightmare Desert and being forced to fight for their lives without a real opportunity to rest. Masters of the Great Clan Valor, Great Clan Song, and the government were working together without a second thought. Even though some of the wounds they bore had been delivered by the other humans in the group, no one thought about continuing the feud. All conflict had been forgotten in the face of the ruthless desert. Indeed, the spell had a way of bringing people together, and Sunny remarked how sweet that was. It also had a way of bringing nightmare creatures and people together. As soon as their party of 5 entered one of the steel fingers through a narrow crack, Sunny's expression darkened. There were about 20 humans sheltered in the cool darkness of the hollow tower. Some looked like they had just returned from exploring the dunes, while others were busy with various tasks, preparing food, refining the carcasses of dead abominations into valuable materials. drawing maps of the surrounding area. Even though Wake of Ruin had abandoned the group, the Ascended didn't seem willing to give up on their survival. Perhaps it was because of a certain person who had taken charge and driven them forward. So she survived, too. Morgan had lost her intricate plate armor and wore a black tunic. The scarlet cloak was wrapped around her shoulders, falling to the ground like a waterfall of blood. The Princess of War seemed tired and reserved. There were no wounds on her body, but the usual sharpness of her vermilion eyes was strangely dulled. She was standing in the center of the hollow tower, listening to the reports of the scouts, as the 5 of them entered. Morgan looked up from a crude leather map and glanced in their direction with a distant expression. Then, her eyes shimmered.
My sister is alive.
Her voice was hoarse and emotionless. The scouts were confused for a moment, then turned around. Their faces grew excited, and Morgan started to say it was.
Rids.
However, the words were drowned out by a happy shout calling them Doofus and Princess. A tall and robust figure that seemed to have been cast of lustrous steel walked over to them with ginger steps and subjected Sunny to an earth-shaking shoulder pat.
Oh, you guys made it.
With that, Effie grinned and suddenly grabbed startled Nephis into a tight hug, who protested that she couldn't breathe. The huntress let go of Neph and looked at the 2 of them with sparks dancing in her eyes.
Thank the gods and your masters, after all. I was afraid that the 2 of you pale apparitions would be all red and burned by the time you got here.
Usually, Sunny would have reacted in a more friendly manner, but right now, he didn't pay Effie a lot of attention. Instead, he was carefully studying the other Ascended gathered in the finger of the titanic gauntlet. His expression was neutral. His mind, however. Damnation. Under Sunny's relaxed gaze, the souls of the Ascended shone with bright radiance. However, not all of them. Some were hiding a boundless expanse of vile, virulent darkness. They were infected by the cancerous growth of corruption. Out of the 20 masters here, 7 were no masters at all. They were all vessels of the same creature that had worn the skin of Ascended Sue as a disguise. We are all going to die, aren't we? Sunny lingered for a few moments, then looked at Effie.
We are all right, but what about you? To be honest, I'm a little surprised that you haven't eaten all these people yet. I mean, I know your appetites, and is it just me, or have you gained weight?
Time. He had to stall for time. Effie blinked a couple of times and smiled softly, which would have made Sunny shiver in any other situation, and he warned her to keep talking or he would eat her first, accompanied by her. They walked toward Morgan. As they did, the atmosphere in the hollow tower suddenly grew a little colder. Morgan's voice was even as she called out Song Seishan's name.
Seishan.
Seishan met her piercing gaze with the grace of a person who had survived a decade of hell on the Forgotten Shore. Her reply was similarly composed.
Morgan.
The 2 stared at each other with frightening intensity. Kai coughed and shifted from one leg to another. Sunny hesitated, then sent him a mental message. Why didn't you tell us that Morgan was here? The archer looked at him and shrugged helplessly. She must have arrived after I left to search for more survivors. She wasn't here in the morning. There won't be trouble, right? The 2 of them will see reason, surely. A gust of wind crashed into the hollow tower, and the ancient metal groaned. Morgan shook her head.
We'll put our quarrel aside. For the time being, let's return to the waking world before doing anything rash.
Seishan slowly nodded.
Agreed.
She didn't seem to be flustered at the prospect of facing the Princess of War in combat. Sunny wasn't entirely sure how powerful Seishan was. Currently, after all, she had ascended later than most of them. On the other hand, she was older and had accumulated much more experience in the Dark City. It didn't matter, though. Last night, the cumulative power of Seishan, Sunny, Jet, and Saint had been barely enough to slow down just one vessel of the Gate Guardian for a few moments. And now, they were surrounded by 7 of them. Morgan seemed to have no idea of how doomed they all were, which wasn't surprising. In fact, it was Sunny and Jet who were freaks capable of peering through the disguise of a great abomination. Both of their aspects were one of a kind and exceedingly rare. It would be quite improbable to assume that anyone else in the nightmare desert possessed similar capabilities. Maybe Cassie did, but she wasn't here. Sunny felt his chest grow tight as he thought about the blind girl. Where was she now? Had she managed to escape the slaughter? Morgan, meanwhile, looked at Nephis.
I must congratulate you, sister, and Master Sunless, of course. Killing Dire Fang, it was a pleasant surprise. I should think about how to reward you.
She turned to Sunny, remained silent for a moment, and then suddenly smiled.
I do hope you won't ask to fight me again, though Master Sunless, the environment here is not quite as dreamlike as the last time I had to reward you.
As Nephis, Seishan, Effie, and Jet gave Sunny strange looks, he cleared his throat and forced out a smile.
No, I wouldn't dare to request something untoward again.
At the same time, he used the blessing of dusk to speak with Morgan silently. Smiling pleasantly, he said, "Do as I say if you don't want to die." Crab. Sunny didn't know what the creature pursuing them was, exactly. He had hoped that the possessed corpses weren't the vessels of a single being, but instead separate abominations, akin to minions of a tyrant. But even if they were, there was obviously a way for them to share information. He knew it because his hopes were being crushed right in front of his eyes. If there was no way for the puppets of the Gate Guardian to share knowledge, then he could have pretended to be oblivious to their presence and bought some time. But the 7 taken masters were all seemingly aware that Sunny could tell what they were. They slowly started to move, at first. Their movement seemed inconspicuous, but it quickly became apparent that they were encircling those ascended who remained human. There were eerily human smiles brightening their faces. On one side, there were 7 possessed corpses with the power of a great abomination. On the other side, there were Sunny, Nephis, Kai, Effie, Jet, Seishan, Morgan, and 11 more unaffected masters. Morgan had 3 transcendent echoes left. Seishan had 1. Sunny had Saint and Nightmare. An imp, in fact. The scrawny goblin was the linchpin of their survival. Get everyone to come closer. Sunny had already explained the situation to Morgan and coordinated with the rest of his allies. Their only chance to survive was to run. But escaping from the ring of possessed corpses seemed impossible. Nevertheless, they had to try, knowing what to do. Morgan calmly looked at the 11 ascended who hadn't been taken by the Gate Guardian yet and called.
You there, come here. I've questions about our rations and water reserve. You too. How many tents can we make from that hide?
The masters left what they had been doing and walked over by that time. Even they started to notice that something strange was going on. One group of people was standing in the center of the hollow tower. The other group had spread out, surrounding them. The ancient steel was groaning as it was assaulted by the wind. That's all. There are also 3 ascended outside, but only 2 of them are human. Lady Morgan, what's going on? The human masters seemed confused. Meanwhile, the other humans were slowly shifting, assembling into a loose battle formation. Their weapons were already in their hands. Sunny was the only one who remained motionless. What was the point of trying to fight 7 great abominations? It's almost time. I just need a few seconds. Morgan looked heavily at her subordinates, then said evenly for them to come closer. They glanced at each other, then hesitantly took a few steps forward at the same time. The smiling corpses took a step forward, too, and Sunny shouted for Kai to move now. Sunny's shout was drowned out by the groan of twisting metal, and then that groan was drowned out by Kai's voice. The handsome archer only spoke one word, but it enveloped the space within the hollow tower entirely, echoing in its dark expanse, telling them to stop.
Stop.
Arg's hell. Sunny had never been on the receiving end of Kai's ascended ability, or rather, he had never been the subject of its negative influence. His friend usually used the power of his voice to inspire soldiers and ignite their desire to fight, win, and survive. But that wasn't the only thing he could do. Nightingale's true power was to compel living things and bend them to his will. When Kai had commanded everyone to stop, it was as though the world itself froze. Sunny was still able to move thanks to his impressively high mental defense, but it was as though a mountain had fallen on him. It wasn't physical weight, though rather, it was incredibly hard to remember why he wanted to move in the first place. With some effort, he managed. The others were similarly affected, resisting the command with varying degrees of success. Even the 7 corpses stumbled. However, they shook off the effects of the command almost instantly. Still, it bought Sunny the couple seconds he needed, because at that moment, the whole tower suddenly shuddered and collapsed. There was a deep groan of tearing metal, a shrill screeching noise, and then wind and light flooded the interior of the steel finger. That was because Imp had gnawed through the outer layers of the tower, of course, going most of the way around it. Sunny had summoned the gluttonous goblin immediately after noticing the lookouts of the survivor group, while he was greeting Effie, talking to Morgan, informing her of danger, and observing the 7 vessels of the gate guardian slowly surrounding them. The ravenous fiend was busy stealthily eating through the exterior of the steel finger, and just then, the tower finally couldn't support its weight and toppled. The cool shade filling its interior was instantly torn apart by blinding sunlight, but plenty of shadows remained, calling upon them. Sunny instantly manifested dozens of dark tentacles. Some of them wrapped themselves around the bodies of those corpses that hadn't been buried under countless tons of steel, only to be instantly destroyed. This was just a distraction, though the rest of the shadow tentacles grabbed the humans and unceremoniously tossed them out of the way of falling metal into the merciless heat of the desert. At the same time, a whirlwind of sparks manifested into transcendent echoes who threw themselves at the abominations. Everyone used their own means to slow the enemy down. There were screams, there was noise, there was an explosion of white flame, and the sharp sound of the air being cut by countless blades. Blood spilled, falling onto the white sand. Sunny rolled and jumped to his feet.
Run!
Most of them had made it out of the tower, but 5 out of the 11 ascended that Morgan had called were nowhere to be seen. The white dunes around them trembled and then exploded, and a vast cloud of sand covered everything in sight. Kai held Effie's hand as he soared into the air. Nightmare appeared out of the darkness, rushing toward Jet. Morgan had her own mount, which looked like a horned destrier made of steel. Sunny found himself near Nephis. Without thinking about what he was doing, he grabbed her tightly and stepped through the shadows. An instant later, the 2 of them appeared a few kilometers away, in the shadow of a tall dune. He had pulled her with him into Shadow Step. Sunny stared at Nephis with a startled expression, and she looked at him with wide eyes.
What was that?
He opened his mouth, then froze for a moment.
I just thought that it might work. What would you know? It did.
Sunny couldn't bring other living things with him when he stepped through the shadows, but his aspect had already shown that it treated Nephis as an extension of him in certain instances. Or rather, it was more like it treated Sunny as an extension of Nephis. They were connected by shadow bond, which meant that their souls were bound together. Sunny didn't have to like it, but it would be foolish not to use it. Nephis looked at him for a moment, then nodded.
Okay.
She looked at him some more and added,
You can let go of me now.
Sunny smiled crookedly and admitted that he really couldn't. Just then, a black steed jumped over the dune and rushed down its slope. Jet shouted from Nightmare's back as they flashed past them, telling them to move as they were being followed, burning through his essence. Sunny sighed, and then pulled Nephis back into the shadows. They were on the run. The Nightmare Desert welcomed them with immaculate purity and lethal heat, the white dunes stretching toward the distant horizon. The merciless sun burned in the azure sky like an incinerating well of molten silver, and a harrowing enemy was following them across the sands like an inescapable omen of torturous death. I am tired. Sunny was bone tired. He had long exhausted his reserves of essence, leaving just enough of it untouched to not be helpless in a fight. Not that fighting the Gate Guardian was a real option. Nephis might have destroyed one of its vessels, but it had almost killed her. The rest of them didn't possess aspects that countered the creature's powers. Either fighting the puppets of the great abomination meant giving up on life, or, much worse, their very humanity. Blindly advancing deeper into the desert wasn't much better. There was a terrible foe pursuing the battered group of survivors, but there were also countless dangers ahead of them. The dunes hid all kinds of nightmare creatures, and several people had already been killed in the short, but brutal and unavoidable skirmishes with the wandering abominations. None of those abominations had been weaker than corrupted. The people fighting them were all tired, wounded, and in a desperate hurry. As well, there were only 13 of them left, looking at the exhausted survivors. Sunny wondered how many of them would live to see nightfall, how many would survive until dawn. The mighty masters were already resembling walking corpses. They were moving forward with grave expressions, suffering silently as the terrible heat pressed them into the ground. Their hair and armor were covered in sand. Those with echo mounts were in the vanguard. Those without shakily followed behind. Sunny and Kai were serving as the scouts of the party. Morgan, Nephis, Jet, Effie, and Seishan were the main strike force. The rest were just trying to stay alive. Worst of all, everyone knew that it was pointless. Even more disheartening than the sea of abominations ahead of them and the great horror pursuing them was the fact that the party was aimless. They had no clear goal, just a stubborn hope to survive. Before, these people had the same plan as Sunny, reach the Black Skull and escape into the waking world. Now that they knew what was out there in the pristine white purgatory of the nightmare desert, though, the Citadel had become the source of their fears. That was because Mordred had slaughtered every awakened sent there by Clan Valor, and the corpses he had left behind were the perfect vessels for the Gate Guardian. One great abomination was terrifying, while 7 of them were beyond the concept of fear. What about dozens, then? The Citadel that the survivors had been putting their hope into had turned out to be the gates of hell. So, there was nowhere for them to go anymore. Then why continue forward at all? For now, they walked out of fear and out of a growing sense of panicked urgency. They continued forward because there was a creature of pure dread following them from behind. Escape the pursuit. Find a place to wait out the night. They would come up with a solution later. Sunny was walking with Nephis as his shadows scouted the path ahead. One of them was gliding across the dunes side by side with the swift shadow of Kai, who flew high above. There was no real need for both Sunny and Kai to keep an eye on the same stretch of the desert, but this way, Sunny was able to reach him with the blessing of dusk, up ahead, behind the crooked dune, and he groaned that he was really tired. Up ahead, behind the crooked dune, yeah, I sense it. A tall figure in an intricate suit of onyx armor emerged from the shadow. A few moments later, 2 arrows pierced the flesh of a nightmare creature that was slumbering in the shade of the tall dune. The creature exploded forward in a fury of sharp fangs and claws, its roar spreading far and wide across the desert. By the time it reached Saint, it was shaking under the weight of numerous arrows. One more fell from the sky like lightning. The abomination swayed and toppled, falling heavily into the sand. One more for me. Sunny smiled bleakly. You've a better vantage point, cheater. Then the smile slowly disappeared from his face, accompanied by one of Sunny's shadows. Kai was far ahead of the party. 2 more shadows kept to the left and right of the survivors, separated from them by several kilometers of white sand. One more was far behind them, and it was that one who noticed a dark silhouette appear from behind the crest of a towering dune. The figure froze for a moment, then turned and stared directly at the shadow. Sunny shuddered. His dry lips cracked as he shouted that it was the Gate Guardian.
It's coming, a move.
The exhausted masters paled and gritted their teeth. Then, they gathered all the strength they had left and dashed forward, running as fast as they could. The incandescent sun was drowning the world in blinding light and immolating heat, as the shadow that had noticed the pursuer flew away. Another figure crested a dune several hundred meters away from it, and then another. Sunny ran, carefully considering his options, feeling aggrieved, and cursed, damn it, he felt. Aggrieved, he felt indignant. He was appalled at the fact that he had been reduced to the state of only being able to run away and hide, like a frightened rat. But that was, and had always been, reality. Humans were small and weak in the world of the nightmare spell. Even humans like Sunny, conquerors of nightmares and slayer of titans, were no more than mice. I am tired, I am tired, I am tired of being powerless. I am tired of being weak. I want to be stronger, much stronger, so much more. Overcome by a deep, painful longing, Sunny gritted his teeth and ran. There were 13 humans desperately trying to escape the pursuit of the great abomination. Or rather, there had been, without anyone noticing the reason. One of the masters stumbled and fell, no one had attacked her, and the pursuing corpses were still out of sight. The woman grabbed her neck and screamed. A moment later, she rose with a strange smile on her lips. Where a radiant soul core had been, there was now nothing but spreading darkness. Sunny commanded the soul shadow that had remained with him to wrap itself around his body, and ran, cursing it all. Someone's hoarse shout reached his ears. Split up. No, you fools. The logic of that desperate call was simple and not without reason. There were 7 vessels of the Gate Guardian, 8 now, and 12 surviving humans. If they escaped in different directions, some of them would have a chance to survive. But it was pointless to apply logic to great abominations. These beings existed outside any kind of human rationale. Outside reason. Only by staying together and helping each other would the survivors have a chance to preserve their lives. No matter how small, it was already too late to try and explain that to the frightened masters, though while Morgan, Seishan, and the members of Neph's cohort chose to stay close to each other, the other 5 ascended turned and ran in different directions. Not a second later, a dark blur intercepted one of them, and a fountain of blood shot into the air, up ahead. Morgan looked back from the saddle of her steel mount and cursed. Then, she hesitated for a moment and jumped off its tall back. The echo then galloped in the direction of the approaching corpses, lowering its horned head, as a whirlwind of scarlet sparks rose around her. Seishan stopped and turned around. Her exquisitely beautiful face was cold and somber. The two of them looked at each other, and then, Seishan slowly raised her hands. Jet was riding Nightmare, so she was far ahead of the rest of them. Effie was maybe the fastest runner among the group of survivors, so she was ahead of the pursuers as well. Only Sunny and Nephis were falling behind, and Sunny asked what they were doing. Only Sunny and Nephis were falling behind. As they ran, Neph's eyes shone with white radiance. She briefly touched Sunny's shoulder, and he felt the nurturing warmth of her flames pour into his soul and body. Instantly, their speed increased. It was still not enough, though, through the shadows. Sunny felt something swift flying toward him from behind. The shadows he had sent to scout were still moments away from reaching him. He knew that he had to use some of his remaining essence and dodge the attack through Shadow Step. Before he could, however, Seishan outstretched her hands, bringing her thumbs and index fingers together in a perfect triangle. Then, a drop of dark crimson liquid suddenly materialized in the air within the triangle. Looking at it, Sunny suddenly felt a hint of unknown awe brush against his heart. The drop of blood swirled, and then, the whole world was suddenly painted in shades of red. Sunny didn't know what the daughter of the Queen of Worms was doing, but he felt as if something vast and terrifying silently moved past him, and then enveloped the white sands of the desert. There were screams, and Sunny asked what this was. There were screams. The creature lunging at him suddenly slowed down and veered off. Then grew still. He didn't dare turn around as Sunny and Nephis reached Seishan. The hurricane of scarlet sparks raging around Morgan formed into scores of beautifully forged swords. The swords trembled slightly, hovering in the air, and then suddenly shot forward like an avalanche of steel. The shadows arrived, wrapping themselves around Sunny and Nephis. Saint was also there, standing on a white dune as she drew her bow. Behind them, a cacophony of noise exploded. And the sand shifted. Several dunes collapsed, with a white cloud rising into the air. They ran, urged on by Sunny to hurry up. Damn it all. Stop, look there. Sunny cursed as he threw himself to the ground, hitting the sand to slow down. The sun was setting, and they were still running as fast as they could. His exhaustion had long transformed into something much more dire and primal. Sunny hadn't even known that an ascended body could be that drained of everything. Neither the augmentation of the burning shadows nor the tenacious nature of blood weave were enough to overcome that terrible fatigue anymore, even though he had to stop for a dreadful reason. He still welcomed the short moment of falling onto the sand, a split second later, though Sunny had to push his battered body into a roll and jump back to his feet. Curses. Miraculously, they had managed to escape all but one of the taken corpses. The last one still pursued them, never letting the group, now reduced to only 7 people, stop and rest for even a minute at some point. The heat and the scorching sand had transformed into a lethal threat of their own, and yet they persisted. Until now, That was because a second corpse suddenly appeared out of nowhere, barring their path. The figure standing in front of them wasn't one of the original 7 abominations, though instead it was a familiar face. Sunny let out a tired sigh, so he's here as well. Master Su was staring at them with an eerie smile. Nephis, Effie, Jet, Morgan, Seishan, Kai, and Sunny. The 7 of them had nowhere else to run. One vessel of the Gate Guardian was behind them, and the other was in front of them. The night was approaching.
What do we do?
Kai's voice sounded tense and tired. He could still escape, of course. Maybe. The great being approaching them had to have ways of dealing with flying prey. Sunny closed his eyes for a moment, then outstretched his hand and summoned the Sin of Solace. What else was there to do? He commanded all but one of his shadows to wrap themselves around the white jade of the cursed blade, turning it perfectly black.
And kill the bastards.
They had to kill them or die, kill them and die if need be. Either way worked. It was better than turning into the skin costumes of the Gate Guardian themselves. Anyway, but Sunny wanted to live. Think. They had a very small chance of coming out of this fight alive. However, there was always hope. No matter how impossible the odds, what was hope? Hope was a desire, perhaps the paramount desire. A yearning so powerful and resilient that it could hardly be vanquished or destroyed. The darkest and most inescapable despair couldn't conquer hope. Even demons in hell hoped to reach heaven one day. They longed to see their deepest desires come true. And that longing alone could make them continue suffering and struggling instead of searching for solace in the peaceful embrace of death. Life was war. After all, hope, desire, it was a powerful thing. Longing. Sunny glanced at Nephis, considering she was the only one among them capable of dealing permanent damage to the vessels of the Gate Guardian. Her soul flame seemed to be like poison to the abominable creature. The wounds Sunny and the others had dealt to the corpse of Master Su would instantly heal, but the puppet that had attacked Neph was burned to death by it. A hurricane of thoughts flashed through his mind in a split second. If they could survive today, would be through the power of longing that the light-bringer aspect seemed to contain, the soul flame, pure, cruel, and incorruptible, and Sunny mused that she was their best chance, pure, cruel, and incorruptible. There was no time to think, starting to move. Sunny connected the minds of the 7 masters together through the blessing of dusk. We need to destroy the creature in front of us before the one behind catches up. There's no other way. We might not even be able to fight one. So fighting 2 at the same time is a death sentence. The 6 of us will restrain it. Nephis will kill it. Go. They had maybe a handful of seconds before the pursuer showed up. The 7 of them had to slay a great abomination before that happened. Usually, it would have been impossible to even deal minor damage to a creature 2 whole ranks above their own level. Sunny had failed to pierce the skin of the first fallen abominations he met as a sleeper. After all, nevertheless, that abomination died in the end. The gap between ranks was vast, but it wasn't absolute. There was nothing indestructible in the world, and even the gods were dead. Everyone and everything was vulnerable to something. None of them were ordinary masters, and each had accumulated much more tools and killing implements than any sleeper could ever possess. Better yet, there was someone among them whose aspect countered the powers of the Gate Guardian. Sunny knew that he had to use the best weapon at his disposal to destroy the enemy, right now. His best weapon wasn't the Sin of Solace. It was Nephis, gritting his teeth. Sunny dashed forward at the same time. All his shadows left him and embraced her, turning the hue of her white flame colder and more menacing. She had trusted him to kill Dire Fang. Now, Sunny was going to trust Nephis to kill the vessel of the Gate Guardian barring their path. As soon as the shadows slid from the blade of the Sin of Solace, the vague figure standing near him suddenly grew more blurry and clicked its tongue in disappointment, and things were just getting fun. Sunny ignored it. There was no need to discuss anything. Everyone knew what they had to do. All 7 of them lunged at Master Su. It was hard to attack a single target without getting in each other's way. And yet, they managed. A black arrow pierced one of his eyes, followed by a white one that destroyed the other. The corpse's head jerked back. At the same time, an iron rain of shurikens shredded its chest and right shoulder, almost severing the entire arm. Jet knew that her power wasn't enough to damage the creature's soul, abandoning her most feared ability. She aimed to reduce the creature's mobility instead. Effie's transcendent spear shot toward one of Master Su's knees, while Morgan's sword flew at another with lightning-fast speed. Seishan's claws sank into his left shoulder and elbow, tearing both joints apart. The Sin of Solace hissed through the air as it fell on the creature's head. Their task was to slow the Gate Guardian down and allow Nephis to deliver the fatal strike. But as the two arrows exploded from the back of Master Su's head in a fountain of blood and brain matter, his eyes had already restored themselves. Burning with malice and glee, the shurikens fell into the sand as the flesh mangled by them rippled and was immaculately restored. The corpse took half a step, and both Effie's spear and Morgan's sword somehow missed. Seishan's eyes widened. Sunny cursed under his breath.
Damn.
The corpse exploded forward. Effie's shield shattered as she was thrown back. Seishan fell down, sharp shards of bone protruding from her broken arms. Morgan blocked with her sword, but the sword burst into countless steel shards. She was sent flying in a whirlwind of scarlet sparks and blood. Sunny barely avoided having his neck sliced open by falling into the shadows. The creature refused to be slowed down, and Nephis was now alone, face to face with it. Her radiant sword shot forward with unimaginable speed, its vicious blow enhanced by the full force of the soul flame and the 5 shadows. However, Sunny finished the curse. Master Su simply raised his hand, catching the incandescent blade in a fist and easily shattering it. The fingers of his other hand wrapped around Neph's neck. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Sunny was emerging from the shadows, but he was too slow to change anything. Then Neph's neck snapped like a twig, her body grew limp, his mind was empty. For a split second, everyone froze, petrified. In that moment of shock, Neph's hand rose and grabbed the creature's wrist. The sparks dancing in her eyes suddenly ignited, turning into 2 blinding stars. White radiance shining through the gaps of her broken armor became larger, hotter, and infinitely brighter. She was like a mass of blinding silver light, not too different from the merciless white sun that burned in the scorched sky. A moment later, her radiance exploded into a flurry of flames, which swallowed both her slender silhouette and the abominable corpse of Master Su. Suddenly, the unbearable heat of the desert seemed mild and cold. A towering bonfire of pristine flames enveloped both Nephis and the vessel of the Gate Guardian. Rising high into the sky, it bloomed like a beautiful white flower, suffused with both brilliant radiance and incinerating heat. The soul flame burned so hot that, for a moment, Sunny actually felt dreadfully cold, as if he had been transported back to the frigid fields of the Antarctic center. With a curse, he staggered back, fell, and rolled away.
Hell.
Neph's flames could be warm and nurturing, healing and purifying anything they touched, but they could be ruthless and ferocious, destroying everything in their path. Sunny knew that he wouldn't survive a plunge into the blossoming bonfire. He might have shared a bond with Nephis, but he didn't share the lineage of Sun God with her. Even then, Changing Star wasn't immune to the destructive fury of the fire. She was only capable of being locked in the cyclic agony of having her flesh burned, restored, and then burned again without dying. He thought that he heard a distorted shriek escape from the flames, but it was swallowed by the dull roar of the immolating blaze. Nephis and the abomination were in the center of the dire conflagration, their figures obscured by its radiance. He didn't know what exactly was happening there, just that only one of them would emerge from the flames alive. The sand around the white bonfire was already melting, soon to turn into black, brittle glass. Sunny couldn't allow himself to be concerned about Nephis right now, because while she had dealt with Master Su, at least temporarily there was still another vessel of the great abomination coming after them. Jumping to his feet, he spun around, cursing it. Jumping to his feet, he spun around. Seishan had both her arms wrenched and cruelly broken. While the extent of Morgan's wounds was unknown, Effie had received a blow from the Gate Guardian as well, but her shield had protected her from harm, at the cost of being destroyed. So only Sunny, Effie, and Kai were left standing, and Saint, he senses the movement of shadows. Here it comes. A dark blur flashed across the desert, lunging at them from behind. As it did, Effie's spear collided with it in midair. The huntress had tossed it with terrible speed and precision, catching the vessel of the gate guardian in the chest. The whole upper torso of the taken corpse exploded, instantly pulverized into a ghastly stream of viscous crimson liquid, propelled by inertia. The mutilated corpse flew several dozen meters forward, the crimson stream stretching behind it as if suspended in the air. Then, however, the liquid was pulled back and reformed into a human silhouette, still a split second away from turning back into flesh, before it could. A flaming arrow hit the half-formed corpse and exploded, obliterating its entire left side. The gate guardian wasn't disturbed. The mangled corpse calmly walked forward, its flesh already growing back. Its shattered ribs were assembled from bloodied fragments, and its bared heart grew whole before starting to beat once again. One mocking eye had already appeared from the liquid mess of its destroyed face. Sonny felt a chill run down his spine. The sight in front of him was so terrifying that it almost appeared ridiculous, and Sonny asked what the hell it was. Greeting his teeth, Sonny dashed forward. He wasn't in good shape. In fact, his state was terrible. Not only was he utterly exhausted, sapped of all energy by the merciless heat, and low on essence, but he was even devoid of the support of his shadows. It had been a long time since Sonny had to enter a serious fight without being augmented by at least one of them, without their familiar enhancement. He felt slow, fragile, and weak. The sin of solace laughed, amused by his defiant resolve to give it his all, and Sonny muttered that it didn't matter. It was do or die. No, it's just die. Sonny and Saint arrived near the vessel of the gate guardian at the same time, acting as one. They attacked the creature from different sides. A sword made of darkness and a sword made of immaculate white jade struck in unison, aiming to prevent the corpse from taking another step, somewhere behind them. Morgan rose from the sand with a groan. Her sword was destroyed, but she didn't seem to care. Her vermilion eyes blazed with murderous fury. And the Princess of War shot forward like a piercing arrow. Seishan's eyes rolled back, revealing a different pair of pupils, these ones inhuman and monstrous, surrounded by a sea of red. Her graceful figure suddenly grew much taller than Effie, even when hunched, her limbs elongated, and long claws extended from her fingers. Her smooth gray skin suddenly turned rough like that of a shark. Finally, the monster's jaw unhinged, revealing several rows of terrifying triangular teeth. Kai was pale and somber, drawing the string of his bow.
Well, not good.
Sonny tore the sin of solace out of the body of the great abomination and desperately dodged, perhaps because the corpse didn't fully recover from the previous barrage of attacks. Its movements were much slower, barely faster than those of Dire Fang had been. Still, there was no hope for him to escape the retaliation. Instead of trying to simply evade the strike, he simultaneously delivered a backward cut with his sword, slicing through the elbow joint of the corpse. That allowed Sonny to avoid the crushing blow by a hair's breadth. Saint received a bloody fist on her shield and was thrown back, crashing into the slope of a dune. At that moment, Jet was already there. Instead of relying on enchanted weapons, she struck the abomination with her fist. It passed through the chest of the vessel unopposed, directly attacking its soul. Morgan was there, as well. Her palm fell like an executioner's axe, severing the creature's spine, and finally, the monstrous figure of Seishan appeared by the gate guardian's side. Her arms were still broken, hanging limply. Instead of relying on her claws, she sank her frightening teeth into the taken corpse, ripping away a huge chunk of its neck, shoulder, and upper chest. There has to be a limit to how much punishment that thing can take. There has to be. A desperate hope burned in Sonny's chest. But if there really was a limit, it seemed that the creature hadn't reached yet. I am going to die. The thought that flashed through Sonny's mind had nothing to do with the fact that each strike of the possessed corpse was devastating enough to obliterate his body, but more so with the strain that fighting the abominations was putting on it. Yes, it was true. Sonny was facing a great nightmare creature, but he felt as if exhaustion was going to kill him even if the creature didn't. Time moved slowly in a battle like the one they were fighting. He wasn't sure how many seconds had passed since the second vessel of the Gate Guardian had shown up. 12. Maybe it was just 5 or 6 instead. The 6 masters and 1 shadow were somehow holding up against the harrowing abomination. For now, perhaps it had to do with the fact that the constant barrage of attacks did restrain the corpse a little. If there was one vulnerability they could exploit, after all, it was that the vessels of the Guardian weren't as resilient as the body of a true great creature would have been. Perhaps it was because each of them was at the pinnacle of what a human ascended could be, and knew that there would be no retreat. They fought without holding anything back, knowing that death was looming, almost inevitable. Sunny was relatively unharmed, for now, and so was Saint. Kai had been circling above the abomination, sending one enchanted arrow flying after another. The rest of them were in dire straits. Jet was, perhaps, mangled the most. But her unique constitution allowed her to persist in her attempts to shatter the creature's soul despite that, by now, Soul Reaper looked no less of a corpse than their opponent, and maybe even more so. Both Morgan and her were fighting with their bare fists, although, in the case of Morgan, her entire body was the weapon, not just her hands. She had also suffered much more damage than any of them, often taking the initiative to shield the others with her body. That was because the Princess of War was physically the sturdiest, except maybe Effie. The difference between the two was that Morgan seemed to have absorbed a powerful healing enchantment into her aspect ability, which allowed her to recover from the wounds that would have permanently taken the Huntress out of the fight. Seishan had gone even further than Jet and Morgan. With her arms broken, she had to resort to using her monstrous teeth to damage the abomination. Her jaws didn't seem any less lethal than a powerful memory would have been, but the need to be in close, almost intimate proximity to the enemy put her in grave danger. The hideous, ferocious creature she had transformed into was covered in blood, both her own and that of the Guardian. Effie was in a much better position due to the long reach of her transcendent spear. Together, they fought the great abomination, desperately trying to destroy it, slow it down, or at least prevent it from approaching the beautiful bonfire of white flames that still burned behind them.
Die, why won't you die?
The Sin of Solace tore through the rippling air, but the vessel of the Gate Guardian was moving too fast. The jade blade barely scratched its skin, but this time, Sunny wasn't fast enough to retreat. A sharp pain pierced his right side, and he fell back with a scream, for the first time since he had acquired the Shroud of Dusk. The black silk was torn apart. Sunny's flesh beneath it was shredded and turned into an appalling mess. The wound was large enough for most Ascended to be at the risk of bleeding out, but he was different still. It would have been a fatal one if not for Bone Weave. The abomination's glancing strike cracked his ribs, but didn't manage to shatter them. Otherwise, Sunny would have lost his entire lung.
Damn it.
Shaking like a drunk, he rose to his feet. Sweat was rolling down his skin, adding to the pain and suffering. Things weren't going well for them. Morgan seemed on the verge of running out of essence. Before, all her wounds would swiftly heal, but now, she was forced to concentrate on only a few of the most dire ones, leaving the rest open. Jet was starting to slow down, because this fight was a true nightmare for her. Facing one overwhelming opponent was the least favorable situation for her aspect, since it prevented her from absorbing the essence of slain enemies to replenish her own. Just at that moment, Seishan suffered a terrible blow, falling into the sand like a broken doll. Sunny and Saint were still recovering from their last attacks, so Effie was momentarily left alone against the harrowing creature. The corpse moved with tremendous speed, grabbing the shaft of her spear and pulling the Huntress off her feet, a split second before its other hand delivered a lethal blow. Kai suddenly fell from the sky, ramming into the taken corpse and throwing it back. The corpse brought its elbow down on Kai's spine, and he fell into the sand with a pained scream.
Curse it all.
Sunny lunged forward, and at the same time, Saint did too. His mangled side was pulsing with terrible pain. He was tired, but he had to do something, because there was still hope. Even though the vessel of the Gate Guardian seemed indestructible and unstoppable, it was weakening. It wasn't very noticeable, yet, but it was true. The corpse had become a tiny bit slower. Its strikes were a tiny bit less forceful. The speed at which its flesh mended itself had diminished a little. As well, the creature had a limit. Indeed, they just had to push it over that limit. Sunny hadn't summoned Nightmare or Imp, knowing that they were too weak for this battle. He wasn't sure that he could summon them, his shadows, which served as the gates of his soul, were with Nephis, inside the incinerating mass of white flames. Even if he could, all the two would be able to do was buy him a second or two with their deaths. So he had to buy those seconds himself. He attacked, putting everything he had, all his strength, all his cunning, all his will, into the attack. At the same time, Saint thrust her sword forward, covering her cracked breastplate with the broken remains of her shield. But it wasn't enough. The great abomination easily avoided Saint's sword and stepped forward. Its fist struck Sunny like a mountain, and the next thing he knew, he was staring at the vibrant azure sky.
I wasn't too slow.
Sunny tried to stand up and gasped, overcome with unbearable pain. His arm seemed to be broken. No, it was only dislocated, and bloody foam was forming on his lips. Looking up, he saw Morgan stepping in front of Jet, who was on her knees, shielding her from a lethal blow. Both of them were sent flying back and landed on the sand in a heap of bloodied flesh. Effie grunted as she received a downward strike on her crossed hands. Her steel body trembled, and a whirlwind of sand rose into the air around her, thrown up by the shockwave of the terrible impact. In the next moment, she staggered back and fell. The gate guardian was left standing alone. Unopposed, it lingered for a split second, then took a step toward Seishan and raised a fist to finish her off. The corpse's face was terribly mangled, and its teeth were in full view, as if the creature was grinning. Sunny groaned and sat up. The abomination struck before it could kill Seishan, however, and Sunny groaned that he wouldn't get there in time. Before it could kill Seishan, however, a bloody fist suddenly emerged from its chest. The creature froze, then slowly turned its head. A slender hand flashed, separating the head from the neck. Standing behind the gate guardian was a bewitching woman in a torn carmine dress, her long black hair covered in sand. She was almost inhumanly beautiful. However, her breathtaking face was covered in blood, an ugly torn wound stretching from her forehead to the tip of her chin. It was as if someone had vandalized an immortal masterpiece by slicing through it with a sharp knife. One of Beastmaster's eyes was glued close by dried blood, but the other burned with cold, murderous wrath. Her scarlet lips parted, revealing pearly white teeth. "I don't think you'll submit, so just die." Beastmaster's fist was still protruding from the abomination's chest, but in the next moment, she tore it out, almost ripping the entire corpse apart. She seemed angry, really angry. "How dare you raise a hand to my sister?" Before the abomination could assemble itself back together, the beautiful Saint kicked it, sending the mangled corpse flying back. It landed on the sand a dozen meters away, twitched slightly, and then rose, already knitting itself into a single whole again. The two of them stood opposite each other, looking intently at the enemy. The creature was bloodied and beaten, but eerily calm. There was a smile on its lips. Beastmaster looked just as battered, her face torn and painted with blood. Her expression was dark and full of cold fury. She gritted her teeth and spat that she wouldn't show him mercy. The corpse stared at her with a smile. Then, it suddenly spoke, tilting its head. The corpse asked what mercy was. The saint's expression slightly changed. "What the hell? Why are they talking?" Sunny tried to stand up and only succeeded by using the sin of solace as a crutch. He was struggling to breathe, but it was all right. As the great connoisseur of physical trauma that he was, Sunny judged his condition as not really life-threatening. For now, he couldn't really understand why Beastmaster was wasting her time issuing threats to a great abomination instead of attacking it, but that had given him time to assess the situation. At least, the remaining members of the survivor group were alive. No one had died yet from what he could see. That said, all of them were severely injured. Only Morgan and Saint looked like they could still fight, and Effie too, although there was a pained expression on her face with how exhausted and beaten they were, though he doubted that they would be of any use. Sunny himself wouldn't be able to do much. Neff's condition was unknown. Can Beastmaster finish off the creature alone? In the next moment, however, that question was rendered meaningless. Sunny had also received an answer to why the beautiful demoness was wasting time conversing with the creature. She hadn't been wasting time. She had been stalling for time. As the sunlight pouring from the incandescent sky grew a little brighter, a figure made of pure radiance attacked the vessel of the great guardian from behind. At the same moment, Beastmaster dashed forward, Summer Knight. There wasn't one saint, but two. the two transcendents of clan song and clan valor seemed to have made a temporary alliance. A hoarse sigh escaped from Sunny's lips. He summoned the runes and glanced at them to make sure that Nephis was still alive. After doing that, he took a step back and fell onto the scorching sand, closing his eyes. Sunny allowed the pain to wash over him. He only kept up with the ensuing fight through shadow sense. Tense and wary, the vessel of the Gate Guardian was a harrowing foe, even for the Saints. However, despite all its power and uncanny tenacity, it didn't seem to be a match for them. Perhaps the situation would have been different if it were any other two transcendents, but Beastmaster and Sir Gilead were both outstanding, especially Beastmaster. He noticed that wounds delivered by her took a lot longer to close. Some even remained open, as if something was preventing them from healing. There was something else, too. Sunny felt a fourth shadow standing at a distance. It was slender, delicate, and familiar, and he whispered Cassie's name. So it was Cassie who had led the Saints to their aid. Sunny felt some tension drain from his mangled body. As time went on, the corpse seemed to become a little muddled. Its attacks lost some of their edge, and there were drops of blood falling from its nose. Beastmaster wasn't only fighting it, but also battering the creature with powerful mental attacks. I think they can actually manage it. Before they did, however, the bonfire of incinerating white flame suddenly grew weak, and then disappeared. Two shadows were revealed amidst molten sand and obsidian glass, one crumpled and motionless, the other standing above it. Then, the source of the second shadow swayed and fell. The remaining vessel was taking longer and longer to heal its wounds. The Saints attacked it without pause, methodical in their relentless assault. Sunny couldn't see them, but felt the shape and position of the shadows change at a frantic pace. Slowly, tortuously, that pace slowed down, and then, at some point, one of the shadows grew shallow and empty. The vessel of the Gate Guardian had been reduced to a pile of unrecognizable flesh. The battle hadn't been easy for Beastmaster and Summer Knight, but both of them were left standing. Sunny gritted his teeth, then opened his eyes and slowly sat up. As soon as the creature died, Beastmaster turned around and walked over to Seishan, kneeling in front of the hideous monster. The beautiful demoness gently placed her hand on her shoulder and smiled. "I am here, Seishan. I was on time." In front of her, the monstrous creature slowly grew smaller, turning back into an exquisitely beautiful young woman with silken gray skin. Her body was beaten and broken, but she was alive and even conscious. Albeit barely, Beastmaster whispered a few more words to her sister, then rose to her feet. Her gaze slowly shifted to Morgan, who was kneeling on the sand a few dozen meters away. The smile disappeared from her lips. The look in the beautiful Saint's one open eye didn't promise anything good. Sunny shivered, suddenly remembering how all of them had ended up in this cursed desert. To begin with, 3 Category 4 gates might have opened in Antarctica, but the great clans were still at war. Sunny wasn't going to get between Beastmaster and Morgan. Not that he could have done anything if he did, but Nephis was also here, laying unconscious within a ring of black glass. And she was a daughter of the King of Swords, too. Even if only technically. Damn it all. There was no need to do anything, though, because as Beastmaster was looking coldly at Morgan, a tall figure in battered armor suddenly appeared in front of the Princess of War, blocking her from the beautiful Saint's suffocating gaze. Summer Knight stared at Beastmaster and shook his head silently. "Don't even think about it." A dangerous smile appeared on her lips. The beautiful demoness raised an exquisite eyebrow and spoke with a hint of challenge. "What if I do?" Sir Gilead's face remained calm. "I'll kill you." Beastmaster kept her gaze on him for a few seconds, then turned away and laughed. "Maybe next time, then." Glancing at the setting sun, she raised her voice and called out, "Come on, everyone who's still alive, stand up. We need to find shelter before night comes." The sun was drowning in the white sands of the desert, and the murderous heat that had been tormenting them before was slowly dissipating, soon to be replaced by a terrible cold and the chilling terror of the coming night. The battered group of humans was making its way to a towering ruin. The 2 Saints were holding up well, but the Ascended were in a dire state. All of them bore vicious wounds, and each step was torture. The only healer among them was unconscious. and the memories with restorative enchantments that some of them possessed weren't powerful enough to deal with the multitude of severe injuries, at least not immediately. Jet looked slightly better than she had during the battle with the vessels of the Guardian. She managed to kill a nightmare creature that ambushed them as they traversed the desert, and absorbed some soul essence. Still, just glancing at her mangled body was a bit chilling. Seishan's arms were wrapped in fabric. And even though her wounds had been treated, she could only walk by leaning on Beastmaster. Kai was hovering above the sand with a pale face. The great abomination's blow had damaged his spine, and although he wasn't paralyzed, the archer was in a sea of pain. Effie was visibly limping, while Morgan seemed utterly spent and weak. As for Sunny, people sometimes said that he looked like a doll, but if that was true. Currently, he looked like a rag doll that had been neglected for decades, and then thoroughly chewed by an animal or two.
Mom, it hurts.
He was hurting, but the pain was tolerable. At least the 5 shadows were once again augmenting him with their help. He could manage the strenuous journey without too much trouble. Saint was carrying Nephis, who was still unconscious. In her arms, Neph's damaged armor and clothes had been destroyed by the incinerating flames, so she was wrapped in Cassie's sea wave cloak. The blind girl herself was walking behind the taciturn knight, side by side with Sunny. She was the only one in the group who looked exhausted and drained by the heat, but not battered. Then again, Cassie had been in the middle of the battle between the great clans. Too many awakened, enthralled abominations, and masters of clan song had attempted to kill her, only to die by her hand. Her armor was riddled with dents and covered in dried blood, so there was nothing fresh or glamorous about how she looked. Sunny glanced at her, then said quietly,
By the way, you were just in time, thank you.
Cassie remained silent for a while, then shook her head.
There's no need to thank me. It was just a fortunate coincidence.
He smiled. Sunny studied her delicate face, then asked, and she replied that there was zero chance of that.
You knew, didn't you?
Cassie raised an eyebrow.
Knew what?
His expression darkened.
About the gates, that was why you told me to write a message to Rain. You knew that we were going to get stuck in this damned desert for a long, long time. You knew that Antarctica was going to be destroyed, too.
The blind girl turned her head, and he saw her beautiful blue eyes. Her expression was calm.
I know nothing.
Sunny scoffed.
Sure, so you don't know what's going to happen next, either.
Cassie turned away and shrugged. Cassie turned away and shrugged, and Sunny replied that he did now.
They're going to abandon us.
Sunny stared at her for a bit, then chuckled and looked away.
Oh, you don't say.
One didn't need to be an oracle to know that the 2 saints that Cassie had brought were going to leave the members of the cohort behind. They had already helped Sunny and the rest by allowing them to survive, but both Beastmaster and Summer Knight had their own priorities. For Beastmaster, it was Seishan. For Sir Gilead, it were Morgan and, perhaps, Nephis. That was the reason they hadn't left the desert immediately after escaping the battlefield. Both saints could return to the waking world at any moment. They just needed a safe place and some time to activate their tethers. Once they did that, however, they weren't going to be able to return to this particular corner of the Nightmare Desert without approaching the 3 gargantuan gates first. The problem was that they couldn't bring too many people with them. Sunny knew that Beastmaster's limit was 2. She had delivered both Seishan and ascended Bass to East Antarctica, after all. But most saints could only transport people between worlds one at a time. In any case, most of them were going to be left behind. Sunny desperately needed to think of a solution, but he was too tired to form complicated thoughts. After remaining silent for a while, he asked what to do.
Saint Tyrus, do you know where she's?
Cassie slowly shook her head.
We saw no sign of her after entering the dream realm. Same for Silent Stalker. The desert is vast. Chances are they were sent someplace far away from us. Sky Tide would have been able to escape from the Gate Guardian, but she was already spent at the end of the battle. She might have had to flee into the waking world.
Sunny felt slightly disappointed that there was little hope of receiving help from Saint Tyrus, but at the same time, he was happy to know that she might have already retreated from the Nightmare Desert. That, at least, meant that she was still alive. Her entire clan was there in Antarctica, too, considering that great abominations were now wandering the southern quadrant. Sky Tide was the only one who could ensure their safety. She bore a heavy responsibility, considering that it was her actions that had exiled the White Feather clan to the frigid continent, and she had done those things to save Sunny and Cassie. He sighed.
I hope St. Tyrus and Master Roan make it out of Antarctica alive.
And Kim, and millions of civilians that hadn't been evacuated yet, as well as the soldiers of the evacuation army, Sunny and the rest, however, couldn't do anything to help them. Not anymore. Now, their goal was to escape the nightmare desert. He didn't know which task was more dangerous. They managed to reach the ruin before the ancient dead rose from beneath the sand. The structure they used as shelter was palatial and vast, isolated from the desert by a wide field of black glass. It didn't seem like a building that people were supposed to live in, though, after observing many ruins across the desert, Sunny was starting to feel as though there was a reason why all of them were so strange, broken, and deformed. It was almost as if these structures hadn't been built here, but had instead fallen from the sky and shattered after hitting the white sands. Then again, the nightmare desert might not have been a desert in ancient times. Rolling dunes like these were usually left behind by dying seas. If the vast expanse of white sand had once been the bottom of an ocean, then maybe the structures hadn't fallen, but instead drowned. Why would Ariel build his pyramid at the bottom of a sea? Sunny shook his head. No, the description of the Mirror of Truth didn't mention any seas or oceans. There was a lot of talk about rivers in the description of other memories he had received during the chain of nightmares. But what river could have been so vast? The spacious hall the survivors had sought shelter in was illuminated by the light of a small fire. Beastmaster was roasting monster meat above it. She seemed relaxed and amiable, but everyone else was terribly tense. That was because the bewitching saint was perhaps no less dangerous than the apocalyptic battle going on outside, now that they had escaped the Gate Guardian, at least for a few hours. Everyone became painfully aware that being in her presence was an insidiously terrifying experience. Beastmaster could subtly take hold of anyone's mind, after all, to enthrall or drive them mad. Perhaps she already had. Sunny was uneasy, but Summer Knight was more tense than the others. If there was one reason for the beautiful demoness to warp the minds of the survivors, it was to kill him and get rid of Daughters of Valor. As if reading his thoughts, Beastmaster smiled. Gods, can you stop drilling a hole in my forehead, Gilead? I know I'm pretty, but still. A knight like you should have some manners. Stop staring. Summer Knight continued looking in her direction, unperturbed. We're pretty. Have you looked in the mirror recently? Beastmaster looked up at him, blinked a couple of times, then traced the bleeding wound running across her face with a delicate finger. That thing? It refuses to heal. Whispering Blade left me with that present before he died miserably. It's too bad that you couldn't protect your liege, isn't it, Gilead? Summer Knight's expression darkened. Morgan, who was sitting beside him, looked at the beautiful saint coldly. Her vermilion eyes were burning with fury. Beastmaster laughed as Sunny called her a vile witch. Come on, don't be so serious. Look, the food is ready, let's eat. She smiled brightly, and although her face was disfigured by the ugly torn wound, that smile made something stir in Sunny's heart. That woman is lethally dangerous and completely crazy. I really don't want to have anything to do with her. His mind was telling him one thing, but his emotions refused to listen. He had to remind himself of the corrupted tyrant the beautiful demoness had arranged to be unleashed in the middle of a siege capital, and only came to his senses then. Contempt, that was all Sunny was supposed to feel toward Beastmaster. Still, he wasn't going to refuse food. Coming closer, Sunny took his portion of the meat, then sat down and hungrily bit into it. The tantalizing saint gave him a curious look. Little brother, how are you still alive? Sunny frowned, then looked at himself. The black silk of the Shroud of Dusk was ripped open, and his entire side resembled minced meat. He had set the arm that had been dislocated, but his face was still covered in dried blood. At least the internal damage he had received seemed to have healed to some extent. He could breathe, and there was no bloody foam on his lips anymore. Sunny shrugged.
I don't bleed easily.
Beastmaster's smile widened a little. How interesting. With that, she handed the others some food and moved over to feed Seishan, who still couldn't move her hands. The sight of the two of them being so tender and sisterly with each other felt weird. For some reason, everyone was too exhausted to have an appetite, but they still forced themselves to eat right now. Food was fuel, and all of them were running low on it as they consumed the fragrant meat. Nephis suddenly moved and opened her eyes. There was an empty void in them, but slowly. Arduously, a spark of humanity returned, and she turned her head, looking at the silhouettes of the humans sitting in front of the fire. Sunny glanced in her direction, then turned his attention back to the food and sent a mental message. It's night, we're in a large ruin. The vessels of the Gate Guardian are gone. You killed one. Beastmaster and Summer Knight killed the other. Cassie led them to us just in time. He thought for a moment, and added, "Oh, also, you should probably summon an armor memory." Nephis stared at him for a bit, then moved slightly beneath the Seawave cloak and closed her eyes. A few seconds later, a flurry of sparks surrounded her body, and she rose. Her slender figure was wrapped in a fitting black material, which Sunny recognized as the inner layer of the Starlight Legion armor with a bit of surprise. Nephis swayed a little, then slowly walked over to the fire and sat down. He handed her the endless spring, while Cassie offered her a portion of roasted meat. Neph drank deeply from the beautiful glass bottle, then took the meat and looked silently at Morgan and Sir Gilead. Summer Knight offered her a tired smile. "Lady Changing Star, you're awake. Thank the gods." There was a strange strain in her voice. Morgan looked between the two, then shook her head.
Well, now, the two of you are making me feel bad.
Nephis silently sank her teeth into the juicy meat, her expression neutral. Sunny's, however, wasn't, so that's how it's. He had learned everything he needed to know from that short exchange. Sir Gilead can only take one person back with him. After the food was finished, a tense silence settled inside the ancient ruin. Everyone was tired beyond words, but no one dared to fall asleep, not only out of fear of the Gate Guardian finding them, but also because of the two saints. Beastmaster and Summer Knight sat on opposite sides of the fire, staring at each other tensely. Neither could lower their guard, knowing that the opponent would, perhaps, use that moment to launch an attack. I guess their alliance was doomed to be a short-lived one. Sunny tiredly closed his eyes, then yawned.
Fence, but why don't you just leave? Then those of us who have to stay will get some rest, at least.
Both saints looked at him with a hint of surprise after a few short moments. Sir Gilead shook his head slightly. "I must admit, I admire your composure, Master Sunless." Summer Knight must have been under the impression that the people he couldn't save would be terrified, perhaps even begging him to take them back to the waking world instead of Morgan. Well, Sunny didn't consider begging to be beneath him, if there was a point to it, but he knew that the Saint of Clan Valor was never going to abandon the daughter of his sovereign. Sunny shrugged. "The reason why we haven't left is very simple. You aren't a saint, so you wouldn't know. But there are conditions that have to be met in order to return to the waking world. Namely, our anchors in the waking world are affected by the call the same way your anchors in the dream realm are affected by it. Every seed exerts a pulling force, and since there are so many of them in the nightmare desert, that force is quite ubiquitous. We need to find a spot where it's relatively weak first, and this ruin isn't one of these spots." She paused for a moment and then added, "They aren't too hard to find, though I am willing to bet that we'll encounter at least one tomorrow." Sunny tilted his head a little, so that's how it's. It was only logical that saints were influenced by the call even in the dream realm. In fact, the influence they had to endure would be much greater than what the rest of them suffered through. Sunny knew it because of his own experiences as an awakened and as a master. After the ascension, he felt the pull of the call much clearer. It's interesting that she said anchor instead of tether, though. The point was, neither Beastmaster nor Summer Knight could leave the ruin, and the nightmare desert. Before the night ended, Sunny nodded.
Okay, you stand guard then.
With that, he carefully lowered himself to the ground, making sure to lay on the uninjured side, and closed his eyes. Beastmaster was visibly amused by his nonchalant attitude, but Sunny didn't care. He just wanted to sleep. Falling asleep was risky, but so was staying awake and refusing his body and mind the much-needed rest. There was a bit of silence in the dark ruin. Then, the others slowly followed his example. Soon, only Summer Knight and the beautiful demoness were left awake. Sunny was a bit surprised to come back to his senses alive. Of course, his shadows would have warned him if anything truly dangerous happened while he slept. Still, being in the company of saints and great abominations was a bit above their pay grade. Well, technically, the shadows weren't paid anything, so everything was above their pay grade. In any case, Sunny didn't feel particularly rested. His body was still in a terrible state and covered in wounds. However, his condition was much better than it had been before, due to the blessings of the graceless dusk and the tenacity of his unique physique. He felt somewhat restored, sitting up. He saw rays of pale sunlight pouring through the cracks in the roof of the ruin. The air still felt chilly, so it must have been early in the morning. The chill was going to be replaced with appalling heat soon enough. Shaking his head, Sunny stood up with a grimace and stretched his neck. He was the first to wake up, and everyone else was still asleep, except for Summer Knight and Beastmaster, who were still where they had been before. Have these two been staring at each other the entire night? Summoning the endless spring, he nodded at them and forced out a smile.
Good morning.
Sir Gilead greeted him calmly, while the beautiful demoness smiled. You look less like a corpse, little brother. Sunny stared her for a few moments, then said stiffly,
Thanks for the compliment, I guess.
Why the hell is she calling me little brother all of a sudden? First of all, I am not her brother. Second of all, I am not little. The torn wound on Beastmaster's face was still shedding drops of blood, but that didn't stop her from laughing. He struggled to not be enchanted by that laugh. The beautiful saint lingered for a bit, then asked in a languid tone, By the way, I was meaning to ask. Her eyes glimmered with friendly amusement. How did you and Changing Star kill Dire Fang? Sunny looked at her and remained silent for a while. Beastmaster's tone sounded relaxed, but he couldn't help but wonder if there was a hidden threat beneath that calmness. Being threatened by the tantalizing enchantress would be a frightening experience. When the pain of his flaw grew unbearable, Sunny shrugged.
The same way you and Sir Gilead killed a great abomination, by combining our strength and exploiting his weaknesses.
Beastmaster studied him for a few moments, then turned away with a scoff. Sunny frowned as she remarked that kids these days were truly terrifying.
Should I expect to become the target of Clan Song's vendetta after I return to the waking world? Because, let me tell you, I just barely managed to stop being targeted by Clan Valor before coming to Antarctica and experiencing the wonders of the Chain of Nightmares. It has been a very, very rough year for me, so I would really appreciate some leniency.
The beautiful demoness chuckled. You seem really confident that you will be able to return, though. How optimistic. Sunny blinked a couple of times and stared at her with a bleak expression. After a bit of bitter silence, he sighed.
Well, if you put it like that, I take it back. It's not a good morning at all.